Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today I'm joined by Jack for the Sun and Moon Celestial Storm set review. It's the big one, it's the world set. Plenty of interesting and important cards to go over, so let's not waste any time and get straight into it.
Yeah, as usual, we've got our rating system that we've had for the past few set reviews. Feel free to pause here for a little bit more of a breakdown. Basically, we're looking at current standard, with a little bit of consideration for expanded, and of course we're coming up to rotation as well, so there's also a little bit of rotation consideration as well. But yeah, top right hand corner will be our sort of thoughts on the card, our rating out of 5, and also something new for this set, we have the community majority rating. A couple of weeks before we were recording this video, we sent a link out into Verbank and HeyFonte and a couple of other places for you guys to rate all of these cards yourselves. We want to see what the community compares to our own ratings, and then we're perhaps going to look again down the line and be able to see sort of who was right, who was wrong, that kind of thing. So we thought it would be a nice little feature to see how the community thought these cards would pan out compared to our own, and see if there's any disparities, things like that. So yeah, it'll be a nice little feature, but we're not going to talk about it in every slide, just some maybe major disparities rather than every single slide where we're agreeing.
Yeah, so thanks so much for the help for those. I think over 100 people replied, and it would be great for this to be a continual thing. Every time we do reviews, it's a little bit extra for you. So it's not just our opinions you can take on board, you can take on the opinions of the masses as well when you're trying to think about buying your own cards or your own opinions, see if they're backed up by other people out there as well. So should be a good little extra feature for you all. Let's crack on with the trainers to begin with. There are a mixture of reprinted as well as brand new cards from this couple of Japanese sets that merge into our English one. So we'll start off with a Skyridge reprint of a supporter called Apricorn Maker. It allows you to search your deck for 2 trainer cards with the word ball in their names. You show them to your opponent and put them into your hand. Now, this is a pretty weak supporter card. Even with the sort of ball search we have in the format, things like Nest Ball and Timer Ball, they can be compared to direct supporters. If you're grabbing 2 Nest Ball, that's just a fan club. If you're grabbing 2 Timer Balls, that's just an Olivia. Olivia sees no play. Fan club seeing no play right now because of Bridget. I think you're probably best served just playing additional ball search cards rather than a supporter which allows you to then find ball search cards, because you'd rather be doing some shuffle draw, stuff like that. You can physically find the Pokemon or physically draw into more ball search cards if you're just playing those over a supporter. Overall, pretty much just on a very low power level.
Yeah, without things like Dive Ball and Level Ball, which are a bit more niche and saw quite a lot of play when they're in format, I think Apricorn Maker is not going to see any play at all. It needs more use than just searching for pretty much 2 Ultra Balls. We have so many draw supporters anyway. A lot of the time you'll be able to find multiple search cards on your Pokemon anyway, as well as a handful of other cards at the same time, so it's not really going to see any play. Next up, we have Bill's Maintenance. This is another reprint. If you have any cards in your hand, shuffle 1 into your deck, then draw 3 cards. This can be directly compared to HOW and is pretty much solely worse. You can sometimes not sort of want to shuffle a card in, which means your draw 3 is it sort of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It means that you're not going to be able to keep what you want. Also, sometimes you do want to shuffle 1 in, and you shuffle it in, and then you draw it back with the HOW. So actually, you've just had a draw 2, which is directly worse than a HOW. HOW is seeing literally 0 play right now, so there's no way Bill's Maintenance ever makes it into decks as of the current format.
Yeah, pretty bad overall. From there, a slightly more promising reprint is going to be Copycat. It allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck, then you count the amount your opponent has, and you draw the same amount of cards. This can scale quite nicely if you are up against, for example, a Zoroark deck. They're likely to have a fairly large hand size. There's also things like Octillery in the format, so looking towards that 5+ range is really where you're looking to be at if you're playing these Copycats. It does remind me somewhat of Colress, which was a card that has seen a lot of play. Back when we had Versus Seeker, of course, Colress was like a nice one-off because you could get this big, like, 9-10 card hand size for 1 supporter, which is immense value, but there was the downside of sometimes only drawing 1 or 2 cards, and that's really weak. Copycat's actually the same. We currently don't have Versus Seeker. We do have Puzzles, so potentially Copycat could be a one-of, maybe even inside Zoro decks to give you some nice consistency, maybe dropping one of your Cynthias, but At the moment, we just have such a good abundance of supporters. N is crucial for comeback mechanics. Sycamore's just dumping and getting 7, and Cynthia's a nice shuffle 6. I think if ever there's any wiggle room, it's going to be for that Cynthia, but it's just such a solid card that having this sort of optional draw, sometimes you're up against Malamar decks, which always function off of low hand sizes, and that's just really going to hinder your copycats. So right now I don't see it being in a high count of decks, unless you're specifically working towards that target to equal up the hand sizes.
Yeah, pretty much. I think post-rotation there's a little bit more of a positive outlook for the card. We lose N, so this is another really, really nice shuffle draw for us to have. And Zoro seems to be losing a fair bit, but still could be a strong archetype. It gains some very, very good resources in this set and the next set as well. So I think in general, Copycat looks to be getting better as a card. But I think right now it's only ever as a one-of, maybe sometimes nichely as a two-of in certain decks that really require similar hand sizes. But in general, I think we have better options at least until September the 1st. Next up, we have Lisia. This is a really, really interesting card. Searches for 2 Prism Star cards, reveals them and puts them into your hand. Unfortunately, the way Prism Stars are, this is actually quite kind of anti-synergistic in general with Prism Stars. Since Prism Stars are one-ofs in your deck, they're singletons in your deck. You can run more than 1 Prism Star, but only 1 of each different Prism Star. That in general makes it really, really weird to then be able to search for 2, because it means you have to be running 2 different Prism Stars to get maximum value out of this card. A lot of decks aren't doing that. You can see Solgaleo, Lunala, and Volcanion all in decks right now, and all are the only Prism Stars in their respective decks. And the only deck that runs more than 1, at least currently, is fighting decks, usually Buzzwole-based decks, with Diancie plus Beast Energy. And even in that deck, you don't, I think, ever want to be wasting time using a supporter in such an aggressive deck just to find what is technically 50 more damage, but it's really, really slow. It's not Beast Energy, Beast Rings, it's not Elixirs, it's just finding pieces that you should be able to get pretty easily anyway. You have, at least Diancie, you have Brooklet Hillfall, so you should be getting this out on the first turn of the game pretty much, just to lock in that extra 20 damage as long as you can during the game. It just kind of doesn't line up very well with this card. It's kind of not anti-synergistic, but in general, the rule behind Prism Stars doesn't line up very well with the card. And I think it won't see any play until we have more decks that run maybe 3-4 different Prism Stars. I think that's when this card may become slightly more viable. Right now, though, as we've only had 2 sets, it's just not going to see play.
Yeah, I agree. As you said, things like Diancie and even these other basic Prism Star Pokemon, they're pretty easy to search with Ultra Balls and Nest Balls. And if there are like other Prism Star supporter cards, which is the other thing we've seen a lot of, they're searchable via Lele, so there's not a big reason to play Lisia, especially because you wouldn't be able, well, you'd be able to search them, but they could just get removed from your hand anyway, and you won't be able to use them that turn. So pretty slow right now. As Jack said, there's wiggle room for this to improve as more Prism Stars get printed, but nothing too fantastic currently. Next up, we have Steven's Decision. This is a controversial one, seeing as though the community rated this pretty high. 29.3% believed this to be a 4-star card, and actually a lot of people thought it was sometimes even a 5-star card. We're here to tell you that this is not a very good supporter. It does state, search your deck for up to 3 cards, put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck, and your turn ends. That is big text at the very end there. It is effectively a magical ribbon. We know that Sylveon decks have functioned and have been powerful, but bear in mind, Sylveon has other traits to it. It has attacks, in addition to Magical Ribbon. Fairy Wind does damage. Plee-GX can be annoying. We've seen it in like Guardy trying to set up conventional decks. But even then, there were some builds that didn't play Sylveon, and some people thought that was better in the first place. So as a sort of setup card for a regular deck, it doesn't really serve a good role here because you're effectively doing nothing that turn. You're not getting an attack in, which is huge. Even in the early game, if you're playing evolution decks, that can be big. And you're not impacting the board. You need to already have a good board set up to get any value from the Steven, because nothing's happening. You already need to have basics in play and energy cards. Otherwise, you'd rather just play something instant. You're playing Cynthia because you're looking for energy or more basics that turn. You're playing N to affect your opponent's hand size whilst also refresh your own. You're looking to Sycamore just to hit as many cards as possible. Steven's Decision does nothing on that exact turn. You're looking towards your next turn, and The problem with this is that your opponent can affect this, of course. N is currently in the format in high counts. Lele can search it out, Ultra Ball, etc. So people, in many cases, will be able to just turn your supporter into you've done nothing, which is terrible. Even if you don't get hit with Shuffle Draw, which may be more the case in the post-rotation format while N goes, and we're reduced to things like Judge and Marshadow to affect the opponent. Even in those situations, you've done nothing that turn, and they can pick off your most important Pokemon on the board with things like Guzma and such. So it is very weak, I believe, in terms of a setup card for a traditional deck. It's also very weak when you compare it to Magical Ribbon because it's an attack to end your turn, which means you've also been able to use a supporter that turn. And that's where the sort of milling archetypes come in trumps, because you can be using Team Flare Grunt, Team Rocket's Handiwork, Team Skull Grunt, Guzma to stall, all these annoying cards. Lusamine, of course, a big one. And then you can refresh your hand at the end of the turn with Ribbon. If you're using Steven's Decision, I mean, your turn's ended, you've got those things, but you can't do anything in your turn. All you're searching for is like Max Potions and Crushing Hammers, and that's just not quite as good at all. So it's not going to be the face of a new mill deck, and it's terrible for setup decks in general, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like the other thing to note is the format's so aggressive right now. You never really have a turn where you can just say, well, I won't do anything. Maybe the first turn, maybe two of the game. Other than that, you want to be hitting Guzma and Cynthia. You want to be hitting these strong, powerful supporters every turn of the game from pretty much turn one onwards. Even turn one, you want to be Bridgeting most of the time. So it's just, there's just never a nice time to use Steven Decision. I think this card has been overrated by the community overall. Personally, I think there's perhaps niche uses, of course, for things like the new Metagross that we'll talk about, and maybe like I can see some people trying it, but I just think the card is inherently, whilst at least 100% while we have N in format, there is no way this card is going to make a big splash, I don't think. Next up, we have Tate and Liza. This is one of these sort of dual effect supporter cards, which we've seen in the past. This was really, really cool. It's a mix of Olympia and Shauna. You can you choose one, either you shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5, which is the exact same text as Shauna, or you switch your active with one of your bench, which is a switch. Obviously, that's similar to Olympia. You're losing out on the 30 heal, but you are essentially lumping two okay cards together, and that in general makes a better card. So it's in general better than Shauna, and I think actually better than Olympia. Even though you don't get the heal, you do get the option, which is nice. Versatility is always really, really good in a card game. However, at least for standard right now, we have a lot of better options. We have Cynthia for the shuffle part. We have Guzma for the switching part. In general, they are going to be better options. You don't get the versatility or the freedom of having one card that does both, but both of those other options are usually better options anyway. And everyone else is running those. So it's not like you can switch. We have Guzma to get you back, to get them back into the active. And we have Cynthia. So if your opponent's trying to N you after you've made your hand size large, you want to be going for a Cynthia over a Shauna because you're going to get one more card to use before they N. So in general, I think the counters to Tate and Liza in standard are there, and it's just not quite good enough as a card on the whole. It's a really, really interesting card. In expanded, it is actually a 100% buff to Wailord, which is fun. Wailord runs, I think, it varies the count of Shauna, but in general, it is a buff to the count of Shauna that it plays, because you do also have that extra line of text every now and again that may be useful. But in general, I think the card won't see any play in standard, at least this side of rotation, and I would still be pretty surprised post-rotation as well. But it is nice maybe running as a one-of in certain decks that like to move. We have a lot of attacks in the format right now, which are this Pokemon can't attack next turn. So that kind of thing, it acts as an extra Guzma and a Cynthia in one, pseudo both of those at the same time. So maybe this will be tried out as a one-of over a fourth Cynthia or a fourth Guzma.
Yeah, that seems to be its only real window of opportunity in the likes of Boswell, Lapras, and even Volk-EX decks, stuff like that. But it doesn't seem to be great right now, while we have lots of float stones and just more powerful draw supporters. So it's in that sort of middle ground of mediocrity right now, so probably not going to see a huge amount of play until post-rotation. Next up, we have another reprint card. Pretty simple here. TV Reporter allows you to draw 3 cards, then discard any one card from your hand. So obviously you're getting a disadvantage in comparison to how if you're just trying to draw cards in general. But you do have to think about the upside of sometimes putting cards in your discard pile can be beneficial. Things like Aqua Patch and other cards like that. Sophocles hasn't really ever taken off. That discards 2 and lets you draw an additional card of 4. So it's a bit more aggressive than TV Reporter. The only real upside comparatively with that TV Reporter is that you get to draw your cards first. So you actually have a higher chance of drawing into potentially a card that you want to discard if there's nothing already in your hand. So when you're comparing it to the likes of How and Sophocles, that's the sort of power level we're talking. Neither of them have seen much success. Sophocles sometimes was like a random one-of in like Ninetales decks for activation, but it feels like TV Reporter, just because you're drawing less cards on its own, is probably a worse option.
Yeah, I think you compare it to the card we talked about earlier on, Bill's Maintenance. They're both very similar cards, or sort of not similar, but they draw 3 and have a downside. Similarly, How is it seeing play? I think a lot of the things we said about Bill's Maintenance pretty much come into the same, or TV Reporter can also be extrapolated to as well. So in general, it's just not quite going to be standard viable, I don't think, even expanded viable. There's definitely way better supporters. Finally, we have for the supporters another reprint, Underground Expedition. You look at the bottom 4 of your deck, put 2 cards into your hand, and return the other 2 to the bottom in any order. This is a buff for Look-a-Lock. I suppose you now have 8 Lookers rather than 4. That's fun. Unfortunately, Look-a-Lock never took off the deck, or at least the deck Look-a-Lock never really took off in the way I think a lot of people saw it taking off. It turned out to be Oranguru just as a locking card in other decks. Other than that, this card isn't good enough. Looking at 4, choosing 2 isn't good enough when we have ball search or we have any type of search for specific cards right now. We have so many aggressive draw supporters and draw cards as well anyway. You're going to be able to draw through your deck and try and hit your outs rather than just perhaps look at the bottom 4 and pray you can find the 2 outs you need. I think in general, this is one of the worst community-rated cards, and we agree pretty much it's not a good card at all in the set.
Yeah, not very powerful overall, even with the minuscule synergy that it does have with Guru. I mean, we've seen how that synergy's worked with Looker not at all well. On to the items now. We'll kick off with another reprint, Acro Bike. This is one everyone is happy to see return. We rated it 4 stars as our current pool of power draw trainers, or just any trainers really, to give you access to your deck is really low. I mean, we have Order Pad and we have the new PokeNav, which is also in this set. I mean, we are starving for item draw, and Acro Bike is going to be our best bet going forward, trying to build turbo archetypes that can see as many cards as possible in the opening turns. It allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into the hand, discard the other. As we said with TV Reporter, sometimes it can be beneficial to put cards in your discard pile. Things like, again, Aqua Patch, Darkrai-GX, stuff like that. Banette likes having supporters in its discard pile, which we'll look at later. And the new Rayquaza-GX does need some discarded cards as well. Energy cards, so that it can attach to itself, similar to Darkrai, really. So, trying to motor through your deck as quickly as possible. Acro Bike is fantastic. This was a big card in combo decks previously. Obviously, there is Trash Launch Garbodor, which is a hindrance to anyone trying to build turbo builds. But I don't think that makes this in any way bad. I think it'll instantly go into Turbo Ray, and that alone makes it a 4-star card in my opinion.
I think it's fantastic for the future as well. It means more combo-y aggressive decks can be a thing, which is never necessarily a bad thing. It saw play throughout its history in Standard when it was first released back in Primal Clash, all the way up until its rotation, and I think very, very similar will happen here. I think it'll pretty much see play from day 1, and we'll see play until it rotates again. Next up, we have Crisis Potion. This is a really, really fun card. You heal 120 damage from one of your Pokemon, only if they have 30 HP or less remaining. In general, there are not many situations where this is good. A lot of the time, again, I've said this, I think, twice already this video, but the format's so aggressive, a lot of the times you're not going to have 30 HP left. You're just going to be dead. And that means Crisis Potion does nothing. A lot of these potion cards never really see too much play. And in general, it is a 1-star card. But for the very, very niche Regirock, quad Regirock players out there, I believe there is one talking currently in this video now. It's actually a really, really good card. You have Focus Sash to hold on as a Regirock player so that you can Stone Edge again, but you can also then heal all of the damage off, reattach a Focus Sash, and Stone Edge again next turn. And that's actually a really, really strong way of being able to try and maintain these Regirocks. These guys take 4 energy each, and I think that's one of the biggest ways we can actually keep this deck alive, or keep these Regirocks alive. Maybe the deck isn't quite alive. But that being said, other than that, in Standard, at least, I can't see any uses for this as of right now.
Yeah, broken with the broken deck. Other than that, pretty situational. While we have things like Max Potion, that's probably just going to serve a better role because Max Potion is always live, well, as long as there's some damage on your board to heal, whereas this is a much smaller window of opportunity, so there's not much need for this Crisis Potion in the general meta. From there, we have Energy Recycle System. Again, it's a reprint, looks like from Power Keepers. Search your discard pile for basic energy cards. You can either show 1 basic energy to your opponent and put it straight to the hand, or show 3 basic energy cards and shuffle them into your deck. So similar to the Rescue Stretcher, really, where you have a choose 1 effect. You can get that instant attachment if you're missing one right now in your hand, or you can shuffle them back in, increase your odds for things like Max Elixir, or just hitting more in the future. And that's pretty nice flexibility. We've seen how powerful Rescue Stretcher is just for that choose option and how strong it can be. I think Pokemon in general is more important than energy cards because you're typically playing an abundance of energy in the first place. And if you're playing things like Elixir decks, you may just choose to play an extra basic energy instead of this card. So it's more looking towards comparing it to the likes of Super Rod and Energy Retrieval. Again, Super Rod doesn't have the flexibility to get it instantly into the hand, but it can again get Pokemon, which I think is very important. But Energy Retrieval, I think, is where it gets trumped. Getting only to your hand, obviously it's extra energy cards, but in general decks you're only being able to attach 1 per turn, so sometimes that second energy that you recover is just dead weight, and having this choose option to put those energies back into the deck may make it better than Energy Retrieval, which is why we're giving it that bump up to a 2-star card for that flexibility. But I think in general, the people who are looking at this with rose-tinted glasses saying, wow, Stretch is amazing, Energy Recycle System's going to be the same, not really the case, because you can play as many basic energies as you want in your deck instead of this card. So I think that's the reason why this card isn't going to see an abundance of play instantly into lots of decks, but it could still see play over things like Energy Retrieval in some specific energy-reliant builds.
Yeah, I think it's just nice perhaps having another different type, or not different type of card, but a different effect on an energy recovery card. I would imagine it'll see play at some point. These kind of cards will see squeak into certain decks and certain archetypes. It doesn't mean it's a staple in the archetype. Energy Retrieval is fantastic in Volk. It's by no means a staple in Volk, or has been throughout Volk's lifetime. So, it's just another nice card to have, not necessarily hugely important, just another nice card that will maybe be better in niche situations compared to the current or the other different options that we have for recovery, at least. Next up, we have Friend Ball, again, another reprint from an older set. We have, I think that's Skyridge, right? Yeah. You choose one of your opponent's Pokemon and search your deck for basically a Pokemon of the same type. Show it to your opponent and put it in your hand. Pretty much, it is only ever going to reliably work against other opponents when they've played a Lele and you want to find your own Lele. We have Mysterious Treasure, so if you're really desperate to find Leles, you have a way to find them whether your opponent has one out or not. Yes, you have to discard a card, but discarding cards, as we've seen in the past, actually isn't always necessarily that bad. It's a fantastic mirror card, but you can never rely on seeing 8-9 mirrors, even in formats like today's, where Buzzrock and Zoroark are 2 fantastically strong decks. You can't rely on this card being live pretty much ever. So if you're using it as that kind of ball search, you're just better off running more ball search cards. And if you're using it as a lay out, we have Treasure anyway. It's a fun card, but I don't think it's going to see any play in any particular archetypes right now.
Yeah, you have to think that in tournaments, even the most popular decks only take up about 25% of the sort of field out there, and that's a really low percent chance of your friend ball doing more than just finding a Lele if your opponent has a Lele already on their board. So pretty low odds that this does a great amount for you, so bear that in mind. Bit of a awkward card to work overall. Next up we have Hustle Belt. It states, if the Pokemon this card is attached to has 30 or less remaining hit points, its attacks do 60 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. If the Pokemon this card is attached to has no damage counters on it, however, this card does nothing. So the idea is to get hit by a certain amount, similar to the Crisis Potion. You hang on by this small amount of hit points, slap on the extra 60, and you're rolling. Obviously, if people know you're playing Hustle Belts, it's hard for you, or it's easy for them to play around it in many situations, and oftentimes people go for a 2-hit KO, sort of like doing 100 damage, then 100 damage to get up to the knockout, rather than like, I'll swing for 180 and then do 30 to finish you off the following turn. So in general, you can't expect your opponent to activate this for you. You're going to have to try and make your own deck where this comes into play. Now, we've had a look at a bunch of low HP Pokemon, and there is really no option in the format right now for this to work. I think we're looking towards a basic Pokemon with 30 or 40 hit points that for 1 energy can do 30 or 40 damage, because then you can attach that Hustle Belt, get the plus 60, go to 100 for 1, and hopefully you're hitting for relevant weaknesses. But I just don't think that's plausible. I mean, right now we have a Magikarp that, you know, is terrible. And that's
the best option.
That's the best option we have. And you still need to play Rainbow Energies, and it's just a really, really, again, awkward card. I think maybe one day it's a build around, because plus 60 is a huge amount of damage, really. Especially because it's before applying weakness and resistance. That could be immense, but your opponent's not going to do you any favours. It's going to be very rare that they'll leave you with 30 or less just in general play. So I think, again, it's one of these cards that will rarely come up to be much use for you throughout a game.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult card to place because it's such a powerful effect, but such a specific effect. I'm not sure whether it will ever see too much play, because 30 HP, while 60 damage is huge, 30 HP is very, very small. So I think it's very, very difficult to fully analyze this card, especially this is one that really, really relies on future sort of releases. But me and Joe went through every single standard card a couple of days ago before filming this video, and genuinely Magikarp is the only one that fits the bill right now. So basically, in the next couple of years, just look at every 30, 40 HP basic, see what kind of damage it does, and maybe get your Hustle Belts out of the binder. Other than that, this isn't going to be doing much before then. Life Herb is another reprint. This is pretty simple. Flip a coin. If heads, choose one of your Pokemon. Remove all special conditions and 6 counters from 6 damage counters from that Pokemon. Full Heal and Super Potion are seeing no play right now. This is them lumped into one, but it is also on a coin flip. So you need 2 Life Herbs on average to be gaining the effect of a Super Potion and a Full Heal. And you have that you're then running the same amount of cards as you would be running Super Potion and Full Heal. So you may as well run Super Potion and Full Heal because you have the separable effects at least. You don't need to use one when using the other. I've probably already talked about this card too much. It's not going to see play. We have better recovery options. We have Acerola. We have Max Potion. It's not going to see play. I think it's very, very... I don't think there's any archetypes I can think of off the top of my head that need more recovery right now. So I think this is going to be straight for the bulk, unfortunately.
Yep, pretty much. Always has been. Next up, we have Lurball, another reprint from Skyridge. They're loving that set. Flip 3 coins. For each heads, choose an evolution card from your discard pile, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. It's unfortunate that this was printed in a world where we have Rescue Stretcher, because Stretcher is so versatile and strong that I think Lurball will always be in its shadow. It's not inherently terrible. It's just that Stretcher is such a bonkers insane card that as long as this is out, there's no reason to play Lurball.
Yeah, I think Stretcher outclasses it in almost every way. You have versatility, and you also have pretty much the exact same effect on a guaranteed, on no coin flips. So there's no reason to play Lurball, at least while Stretcher is in format. Next up, we have Return Label. This is a promo that we're not 100% sure we're getting, but we thought it was worth talking about anyway, just in case we do. This is pretty simple. Put a card from your opponent's discard pile onto the top of your opponent's deck. There's no decks that we can really see this in immediately. It doesn't actually affect the board state all that much. The format's so aggressive. We have so many strong supporters. Guzma's the only consistent supporter that doesn't naturally go or cause you to draw through your deck anyway. Plus, we also have cards like Zoroark and Octillery in the format right now, and Guru that all draw cards themselves as well. So sometimes your opponent's going to be able to bypass this card that you've put on with return label and still start digging into their deck anyway. It doesn't have any practical use. You're not doing much for a trainer. I don't think this really warrants one of your 60 cards within a standard legal deck. Comparable to Trick Shovel, but Trick Shovel was only ever seen in mill decks. And the big sort of difference between these is Trick Shovel discards a card rather than gives your opponent a card, which progresses your game plan rather than return label. Yes, you can give them a bad card and maybe under, I don't know, an ability lock or an item lock or something. That could be pretty awkward. But at the same time, there's no real major uses for this card right now. And I think there's way more premium cards that you put in those decks anyway.
Yeah, so here's the crazy, wacky play that you can attempt, right? Make a deck full of delinquents, get your opponent down to no card hand, then you're going to try and just start smacking them with whatever's in your active, right? And you're going to use a return label for maybe like 2 or 3 consecutive turns and make sure that they're drawing dead for 2 or 3 turns. Now, this relies on your opponent not having any inherent draw on their board, so they have to not be a Zoroark deck. Obviously, Octillery is currently in Standard. They can't have anything like Oranguru. If they have any of those, that whole strategy goes to pot. If they don't have any of those, you still need to delinquent your opponent to none and be able to beat them on board over like the course of 2 or 3 turns whilst you're drawing into return labels for 2 or 3 turns. So it's this big extravagant line of play to try and make your opponent do nothing for 3 turns in a row, which could be awesome, but it's going to be really hard to pull off. So if there's ever somehow a combination that can make that work, that's going to be hilarious, but beyond that, I don't see this seeing much play. Next up, we have Rainbow Brush. You get to search your deck for a basic energy card and switch it with an energy card attached to one of your Pokemon in play, then shuffle the energy card you switched into your deck. So there aren't a huge amount of decks out there right now that are playing multiple types of energy, unless they're special energy and basic energy. So sometimes you can do this, which is nice, but obviously the Rainbow Brush only specifically states basic energy card, so that's annoying. It can turn itself into a special energy, which I guess is beneficial to you. And then you look at things like Ultra Necrozma. That's probably the only example I can think of where you're playing Psychics and Metals. You can try and do some fixing for you there, but overall I think if you're going to be playing Rainbow Brush, you may as well just play extra of one energy card, choose which one, and that's going to be fine. Especially things like Ultra Necrozma, you'd rather have things like more Psych Energies in your discard pile and stuff like that, or an extra Metal Energy to hit it. I think trying to sort of retroactively fix a bad board state that you've got is just a bad way to play this game. So playing cards that can only help you out once something in the earlier stages has gone wrong for you feels really weird. You just try and optimize those earlier turns. That's the way the game should be played, I think.
Yeah, it feels like kind of a backwards effect. It feels like you should be finding the energy you want and then attaching it rather than attaching an energy and then finding a Rainbow Brush and fixing your mistake. So I think this is not really ever going to see play. Maybe in some random combo Ho-Oh deck that like Ho-Oh. This feels like a Ho-Oh card essentially. So if there's a random Ho-Oh that comes out in the next couple of years, maybe, sure. But right now, Ultra Necrozma is the only deck really that's running 2 types. And there's just like you have Beast Rings, you have Elixirs, and you have Malamar, so you have other ways of accelerating energy. Especially with Beast Rings, you get to choose the energy you accelerate. So, I think there's better options out there. Next up, we have PokeNav. We touched on this card a little bit earlier on. This looks at the top 3 of your deck, and you can choose a Pokemon or energy card, show it to your opponent, put it in your hand, and put the other 2 back on top of your deck. Essentially, this is a worse max elixir because if you're looking at the top 3, that's half of the top 6 and you're not always attaching it. Yes, this can find special energy, which is nice, but we have Energy Lotto for that, and that's seeing very, very minimal play. And this also doesn't accelerate an attachment. This doesn't give you tempo. This actually just finds you the card you need. Well, that's pretty boring. You don't want to find the card you need. You want to be able to attach these cards for free. You want to be able to attach multiple of these cards per turn. You don't just want to find it. That's pretty boring. On the Pokemon side, you have Ultra Ball. That's nice. It's a nice non-discard, but there's the situations where you're going to have the exact Pokemon you need on top are so rare. You may as well just take the hit, taking two discards and find the exact Pokemon you need. Sure, there'll be those random situations where you find that it was the next card on top. That's always going to happen, but there's no point in running really, really niche cards like PokeNav for that one bad time that that Espeon-GX was your next card or whatever. I think this card is super, super weak. To have, in the early game at least, to have the exact answer you need in the top 3 of your deck, you need to be running, for energy-wise, you need to be running a high energy count, and you can only run 4 Pokemon of each, 4 individual cards of that Pokemon, so you have to then find, or be lucky enough to have it in the top 3. It's also really, really bad for like tech cards. If you're running a one-off tech, there's the chances are actually really, really low. In general, we have such great search and support right now. I think this card is very, very rarely ever going to be the answer to another ball search card.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's played Zoroark and knows after they've done their like turn 1 Bridget play and they have to do like a panic puzzle, this is basically a panic puzzle, but you're sometimes able to get basic energy or evolutions out. So that's kind of fine, I guess. It's really anti-synergistic with itself, because if you're trying to build a turbo deck, and you're filling them with item cards, PokeNav can't help you there. It's not getting you more cards to draw you more, it's just getting you energies and Pokemon. So if you're trying to build a turbo deck, this isn't going to try and help you get there, or at least it'll do it in very niche situations. So overall, not all that powerful. Next up, we have Commandment Shrine. This is a very interesting stadium card that says, at any time between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon GX and EX. That's both sides of the field, of course. And we've seen some different incarnations of stadiums like this, and pretty much all of them have seen play at some point. Frozen City, Faded Town, Po Town. A lot of situations where just getting extra damage on the board can be beneficial. Sometimes it just pushes you into a knockout for certain decks. Sometimes it's just going to be, for example, a spread archetype. And I think this is where it may find its home. We do have an abundance of spreading cards right now. For Worlds, we still have Espeon-GX. There's Coco, there's Latios, there's Greninja, and those Frogadiers. There's Decidueye still in the format, that long-forgotten card. There's all sorts of, even things like Buzzwole-GX is still one of the best spreaders out there. It can do like a 90-30 on turn 1. It's insane. So having this Commandment Shrine to get more damage counters on the board to play around with is going to be epic for you, again, because a big deal for Worlds is that we get this Tapu Lele. Finally, the Psychic Lele is coming out, so having more means of spreading all this damage and then being able to magical swap them all around is going to be incredible for you. So I think for these spread archetypes, even just recently at the NAIC, we saw a spread archetype in Yveltal Break that did the 30 to all the bench and then tried to do it a second time and then tried to devolve everything. Really cool combo, by the way. Commandment Shrine means that Coco's doing that exact same thing as a basic for a DCE. That's just like such a good deal for you. So spread looks a lot better with Commandment Shrine, and as we said earlier, it can still see play just being a math fixer in other decks. So this card is very promising, I think.
Yeah, I think spread actually isn't too far from being viable right now. As you've just said, at the NAIC, we saw a few spread decks doing well. We've seen big name players. Rahul Reddy took second in a League Cup with a deck he said was trash, but I think he took it a little bit too far. He went all out like Naganadel, which is crazy. I think if we rein that in, we focus really on just making a nice non-EX deck, I think Commandment Shrine really, really pushes that, which could be a really, really strong deck, I think, with all of these evolutions. With GX is getting better and better. I think there's a lot of room for a spread deck in format. We'll just have to wait and see whether all of the pieces line up ready for Worlds, or whether losing Espeon-GX I think losing Espeon-GX is huge post-rotation. We do have magical swap, so that is something similar. It's not ideal, but it does give you another option against as a finisher, which is nice. But I think the deck, I don't know, it's hard to say whether the deck gets worse because it's not really been a deck yet. but it loses a big finisher in Espeon EX. Commandment Shrine as a card, though, is a really, really huge step in the right direction. It's the kind of stadium that the deck needs. It's played Potowns and stuff in the past, and they're kind of all conditional. Your opponent can play around them. Whereas if you slam a Commandment Shrine down, if they got maybe even 3, 4, that's an extra 4 counters, which is nice. And a lot of these decks are only going to be running, like I say, the Espeon and probably Lele's. So at worst, you're probably taking 2 counters of your own. Well, you're perfectly happy taking 2 counters. You're not going to be benching the Espeon, so you're going to be putting maybe a counter or 2 onto to Lele's. And if they're targeting the Lele's, they're not targeting your Cocos, which are just going to be throwing more damage counters on their side at the end of the day. So it's kind of a win-win for you. I think this actually has real promise. I'm not 100% sold. I can't say I've tested it, but I think in my mind, I really want to try and build this kind of spread archetype and see how far it can take me in some of the matchups that are around right now. The final trainer we're going to be talking about is Sky Pillar. This is very similar to Mountain Ring. This prevents all effects, including damage onto bench Pokemon. This is slightly better because you prevent effects as well, so you have an upgrade to Mountain Ring. However, Mountain Ring saw, I think, pretty much 0 play, and I think Sky Pillar will fall into pretty much the same category. Sky Pillar takes up a stadium slot. Similarly, Mr. Mime takes up a bench slot, but the thing is with Mr. Mime, it's more searchable, and it's one-sided, so you can also play your own spreading archetypes, which is kind of weird to say. You can also play your own sniping and stuff, and have Mr. Mime on your board, which doesn't sort of affect your game plan as well. Mountain Ring saw no play. I can't see Sky Pillar seeing any play. It just does nothing a lot of the time. These kind of stadiums that have passive effects rather than sort of effects that you can use once per turn or that always do something often don't see play, but just because field blowers and stadiums send them to the discard way too often, way too quickly.
Yeah, that's right. I think there are so many decks that require better or different stadiums that they can't even consider Sky Pillar, and there are so many decks that can consider Mime that they just don't play it in the first place at the moment, even though there are whispers of spread decks here and there. No one even techs Mime at the moment, so there's not much reason to play Sky Pillar. Mountain Ring still play, I think, in exactly Groudon, just when there was Yveltal, the Fright Knight, but that's a really specific case when the deck already just wanted cards that said Stadium no matter what they did, so I don't see Sky Pillar doing much at all, to be honest. Right, let's look at some Pokemon. You can see, again, they're not shy to reprint cards here. They're not exact reprints in many of these cases, but they are real homages to some of these older cards. And we'll start off with this Ariados. It has 2 attacks. The first is Reactive Poison for a colorless energy, does 20 plus 50 more damage for each special condition affecting your opponent's active Pokemon. It may sound very familiar, that's because it's the same as Hexed Flame from good old Bright Look Ninetales. That was a deck that people tried to build around, and I don't really see the case for anyone trying to build around Ariados because it doesn't come with the awesome Bright Look ability that Ninetales had, unfortunately. His second attack is Spider Trap. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep and poisoned. Before applying this effect, you may switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active. If you do, the new active is now asleep and poisoned. So, yes, you can pull up some targets, trying to annoy your opponent, try and maybe trap them, poison them, and get things going to sort of lead into reactive poison, but I think that's really slow and not really going to pay off for you. There are cards like Nihilego-GX and even Salazzle, which you can try and combo with Ariados, but I really just don't see an incentive here. The math is always going to be awkward for you. It's not going to be consistent, and like I said, people built around the Ninetales because it had inbuilt gusting, and that just meant that you could always be power drawing and not needing to use things like Guzma or Lysander back in the day, I guess. And Ariados just doesn't have that, so there's really not much going for him overall. Just a big, awkward build-around card that just doesn't get enough of a payoff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Ninetales, or at least the reactive poison style Ninetales deck, was only ever really paired with a Moongus. That never saw top tier play. It saw sort of metagame based answered play, but it was never like best deck in format or anything. And that was even, like you say, with Bright Look. So I think Ariados is personally, or is in general, a much worse card. Personally, I don't think it's going to see any play at all. Next up, we have Sceptile. This is a really, really interesting card, actually. I've seen a lot of talk about this Sceptile. The ability Nature Power, prevent all damage done to your Pokemon with Grass Energy attached from your opponent's Ultra Beasts. Now, Buzzwole is good, has essentially been the word on the street for the past nearly 6 months now. It's just got stronger and stronger. It's seen a lot of support over the past few sets, and I don't see it really going anywhere, at least for Worlds. It's died down a little bit after NAIC, but in general, I think it's still a fantastic Tier 1 deck. And their deck is completely negated if you have a Sceptile out and Grass Energy and everything. They have to rely attacking with Lycanroc, and you're a Grass type, and then you just win because you're a Grass type non-EX, and they have to attack with a Grass weak GX. Well, that's a brilliant trade. So against exactly Buzzrock, this card is really, really good. Unfortunately, there's two big issues. One, you're a stage 2, so against Buzzrock, you also have to deal with their hyper aggression. If you've got past the hyper aggression, you then have to attach your initial energy to Sceptile so it doesn't die to a Buzzwole itself, which means you have to then, unless you have a way of accelerating energy, have an extra turn where your attackers aren't going to have Grass Energy on them so they can still die to Buzzwoles. And number 2, what do you pair with this card? Like, do you just play Quad Sceptile? Well, Quad Sceptile sounds really clunky because it's a full Stage 2 deck, and we don't have Forest anymore. We have some cool Grass search cards like Shiinotic, but in general, that sounds like a really, really clunky deck. I guess there's also a third issue. How does it beat some of the other decks in format? It has a really fantastic Buzzwole matchup, but against things like Zoroark, what are you doing? Powerful Storm's doing very little to them, and yes, they can't one-shot you. That's nice, but Powerful Storm's doing, if they want, they can actually just cap it at a base 60, and then you have to start attaching more energy on your side of the board. Start overcommitting just to try and take 1, 2, 3 shots on Zoroarks. Yes, of course, you're trading up because you're a non-EX, but you're also a stage 2 deck. So there's definitely issues with it. However, as a complete sort of pretty much auto counter to Buzzwole, provided you build your board up, it's a really fantastic card. I think it's only going to see experimentation. I actually think it's going to fall flat in many cases, but this does feel like a deck, or at least a card, that could be broken somehow and maybe a one-hit wonder. And World seems like a fantastic time to do that because Buzzrock is going to be at the best it'll ever be. It loses a lot with rotation. So the time to counter Buzzrock at least would be now, and Sceptile could just be the answer to that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting ability, especially with other Ultra Beast support coming out in this set. It may cover more than just Buzzwole if a sort of Beast box finally does emerge, which we may be talking about later. But as you said, Jack, where does he have a home? His own attack is pretty weak, so you're pretty much just looking at the ability here. It could see play in maybe Zoroark, but then you're having to attach basic Grass Energies onto your Zoroarks as well as DCs, so even that's slow. And they still get bopped by Lycanrocs at times. And I've even heard people talk about playing a 101 or something like a 2-1-2 line in like the new Rayquaza-GX deck, because you're already playing Grass Energies, you can protect yourself and have a really good Buzzwole matchup. That sounds really cute, but it also sounds clunky. Trying to fit in 101 line and like 2 candies sounds really cheeky for a deck that has so much inherent discard in it. You get rid of your candies accidentally and whoops, you can no longer get Sceptile going. So I don't see it being its own deck. As you said, the attack's just not good enough, and there's not enough support to get all this energy into play to make it good enough. But experimentation, light experimentation at best, I think, unless the Beast Box deck does emerge to be a top tier contender, then Sceptile covering maybe like 30% of a day 1 field looks a bit more appealing, even though it is an awkward stage 2. Next up, we have another Stage 2 Grass type. This time it's going to be Shiftry-GX. It's a big 240 HP Stage 2. Weakness to Fire is actually really good in the format right now because there's not much of that. It has a 2 retreat cost and 3 attacks. The first one for a single Grass is Perplex. It does 40 and your opponent's active is now Confused. This is similar to Espeon-GX, which is just a Stage 1 that even searches itself out via Eevee, so really pretty weak, I would say. Confusion does sometimes help out. I mean, Perplex with a Choice Band, I mean, if they flip Tails on themselves, you've done 100. I mean, that is really generous, but I think overall that's pretty weak, but it is an option for you because his other attacks require 2 attachments at the very least with DCEs. The first of which is Extrasensory. It does 90 base. If you have the same amount of cards in hand as your opponent, it does 90 more damage. And that's what's got people's heads turning, I think, in many cases. Doing a base 180 is pretty reasonable. And with Choice Band, doing base 210 is really nice for finishing off Zoroark, Golisopod, and all the other awkward stage 1s out there. And of course, you're a grass type, so you can deal with things like Lycanroc pretty handily. So some people have been talking about this. There are murmurs. Its GX attack, I think, is overall pretty weak. Grass DCE, Pandemonium-GX, shuffle one of your opponent's Pokemon and all cards attached back into their deck. I mean, again, I'll try and be generous. End your opponent to 2. If you can't one-shot their guy, you can just Pandemonium it back into their deck, force them to bring something else up, and just say, hey, deal with a 240 HP Shiftry with no hand. Can you do that? In many cases, they probably can't, but that's pretty much the only time I can see that paying off. It's similar to Tapu Fini's GX attack, so bear that in mind, of course. But yeah, I think it is an awkward stage 2 Pokemon. People are talking about playing it alongside Zoro. Then you've got to start playing your own Judges and Copycats, Rare Candies. You've got to have 2 attachments onto this guy, so it just feels a lot more awkward than something like Zoropod overall. You do potentially have this non-GX attacking Shiftry as well, which has the same synergy with that same extrasensory attack, just with different output. Wicked Wind can be annoying in random spots, but not too often overall. So I think overall it's just kind of too clunky. If you are going through the work to get this stage 2 out, is it going to be good enough? And I think in many cases it probably won't be, because not only is the issue of it being a stage 2 in the first place, its own attack comes with complications which further downgrades your deck overall. So I'm not a big fan overall.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple of people that have chatted to me about this card, but I think in general it'll turn out Zoropod's the more consistent deck. Even post-rotation, I think there's a bit more talk about this post-rotation because we lose things like N, and Zoro gains a little bit more space because it loses a few other cards. So that's where you're going to be able to run maybe a higher Judge and Copycat count. If you're really wanting to build this, maybe taking like a Zoro Guardy shell and trying to build it that way. I think in general, though, Zoropod will be the more consistent. This will be the more spectacular and will probably be, when set up, the more aggressive and stronger deck. But I think just for pure consistency, Zoropod will pretty much get you there most of the time anyway, pre-rotation and post-rotation. Next up we have Blaziken. This is a reprint from Ruby and Sapphire, I believe. It has the ability Firestarter. Once during your turn, may attach an energy, fire energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. So this is essentially sort of Eels. This is Malamar. This is Electric. This is Bronzong. So on stage 2, fire energy is an energy type that hasn't seen that much acceleration in the past few sets, but we have had Turtonator in the past, so it's still got something there. Fire in general isn't seeing play very much right now. I think Ho-Oh-Kiawe is the closest fire deck. Maybe Volk. Volks are a bit of a splash in the NEIC. I think one made top 32, so, maybe some people are trying it out again, but in general, this isn't the kind of card you want to be putting into that anyway. It's actually a World Championship card, so it's been good in the past. I think right now, though, it's not quite as strong. It does also have an attack, Firestream, for fighting DC, does 90, and you discard a fire energy from Blaziken. This does 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon as well, so it's very, very similar to Night Spear from Darkrai. You have the inbuilt synergy of being able to Firestarter your Blazikens, which is nice, to be able to Firestream turn after turn. I think in general, it's going to be a similar story to Sceptile. It's a stage 2, meaning that you're going to have to deal with the aggression of Buzzwole and the inconsistencies of a stage 2 right now. There's also not great things to pair this with. One of the more fun things to do is actually Eternal Flame 2 or 3 Blazikens out and have that as an acceleration. Ho-Oh-GX. This could be a great partner for Ho-Oh-GX. But in general, I think all the pieces aren't quite there yet. This definitely has some potential, I think. Having this kind of acceleration is never going to be a bad thing. So if we ever see a fire deck that, discards a lot, we've seen, as you can see, there's a Typhlosion there. Reshiram Typhlosion in the past. That's the kind of deck we want to be looking for. We want to be looking for a strong fire type that maybe discards 2 or 3 energy, but gets a one-shot knockout. That's the kind of deck we want to be looking for. And right now, Blaziken there isn't an attacker to pair with Blaziken to be able to do that. The fire decks that we have that are in format, the very minimal, or the very few that we have, don't sort of run in that style anyway. So I think it's difficult. It's going to be difficult for this card to see play. But this kind of energy acceleration is never really a bad thing in the format.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think overall, as long as there's Malamar in the format, I don't see why people would turn to Blaziken. There's plenty of good psychic attackers. You'll always be less consistent than them, and you'll carry the same weaknesses as a Malamar in that you're relying on abilities, and you'll need lots of bench to try and get multiple of these going, and you're going to try and power up big one-hit KO sloggers, but you'll always be slower than the Mally, less consistent, and again, carry the same issues. So unless there's an all-singing, all-dancing fire type that can make Blaziken work, I don't think it's going to see a huge amount of play, despite being historically very good to attach energy from the discard pile. Next up, we have Blaziken-GX. It is, again, a 240 HP Stage 2, and it has 3 attacks. The first for a DCE is just Slash for 60. Very mediocre, very poor, actually. I think this is really upsetting. When you're going out of your way to get Stage 2 up, just doing 60 for a DCE is very poor. For 2 fire and a colorless, you do turn your head at this, though. 210 damage, just straight up, is pretty nice. You have to discard 2 fire energy from this Pokemon to do it. But that's a pretty nice payoff, I think. We do have decent acceleration for fire types. Definitely an expanded, I think this is where it could shine. I've heard people talk about using a bunch of battle compressors, trying to get Ho-Oh going with a blacksmith, then you Eternal Flame as many Blazikens onto your board as possible, and then from there you're trying to blacksmith a bunch and just keep going for these explosive kick one-hit KOs. I think that's pretty much the only way I can see this seeing play. In standard as like a traditional deck, I don't see it having any potential. Blaze-Out-GX discards 2 energy from your opponent's Pokemon. Again, we've seen this. I think it was the Umbreon-GX where this has been used, and it's never been too powerful. So the Blaziken really is below the bar, other than the fact that it hits a very nice number.
Yeah, it's a fantastic number, and it like one of the weird sort of anti-synergies is the fact that this is a Blaziken card, because it means you can't even play a Blaziken deck because your 4 Blaziken, sorry, your 4 Torchic you have to split them up into attackers and support Pokemon, and 2 attackers and 2 support Pokemon is very rarely going to make it through the game. So that means you're relying more on Stretcher than these other decks. So I think in general, Blaziken's a pretty weak card. This is the kind of card I was referring to as the Reshiram half of Reshiram Typhlosion in the past. We have Typhlosion in Blaziken. We just need this kind of attack on a basic Pokemon, maybe toned down a little bit because this would be insane on a basic Pokemon. But that's the kind of attack we need to see a Reshiram Typhlosion style deck come back into the format, I think. Next up, we have Magcargo, and this is a 5-star card, we're pretty sure. Smooth Over is a fantastic ability. Sorry, it's a stage 1 90 HP fire type, and Smooth Over is pretty much why we're talking about this card. Once during your turn, search your deck for a card, shuffle your deck, and then put the card on top. This is essentially one half of a Mallow, which is really, really nice. You don't appreciate how important just getting one card per turn is until you start playing Zoroark and Mallow. And like the Zoroark-Mallow combo is, I think, one of the most broken combos we have in Standard right now. So then being able to throw in a 1/1 Magcargo and do half of that every turn, that means your Zoroark deck is guaranteed at least half of a Mallow every turn. If you somehow manage to squeeze in 2 of these, you can actually guarantee a Mallow every turn without using a supporter. Now, it does take up bench space, so I think in general a 1/1 line is going to be better. But like this is so good for upping the consistency of Zoroark decks. Not that they need to be any more consistent. Just a simple 1/1 line in Magcargo. I think we'll go in every single Zoroark deck. I'm saying it. I think we'll go in pretty much every single Zoroark deck until one of these 2 cards is rotated. That's how strong I think this combination is. We do have some other options as well. We have Octillery right now, just before rotation. Though there's a little bit more anti-synergy because Octillery is usually in water decks and non-fire decks. But like Zoroark isn't even a fire deck, so maybe a Magcargo can see more play in that as well. The bigger issue is the fact that Zoroark is also an attacker, so you're not taking up 2 bench slots with support Pokemon. You're taking up 1 bench slot because your Zoroarks are also attackers. We have Ludicolo in this set as well. You may be familiar with Magcargo Ludicolo from the past. That was actually a really, really strong deck. It was actually a world deck, I believe. I can't remember. I don't know what year it was from. Joe will be able to tell you. But it's seen fantastic success in the past, and I think even a stage 2 like Ludicolo could be good enough with Magcargo in the set. Similarly, we have Swampert, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But that has a very, very similar ability to trade, which is just going to appreciate you getting 1 guaranteed card. If you can do this from turn 2, I think the consistency of your Zoroark decks literally skyrockets. I really don't know how to rave about this card more. I think this is my favorite card in the set. It's just, I think this combination is busted, and I think Zoroark players as well are just going to really appreciate just throwing in a 1-1 Magcargo line and being able to find exactly what they want, even post-rotation. They're losing so much, and still, I think Zoroark will be top tier.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be rated a 5 because it will go into Zoroark decks. I have no doubt in my mind. Like post-rotation, it's 100% because there's no Parallel City. For Worlds, I think it's not 100%, but I think it's very likely that there'll be 1-1 lines of Magcargo in the deck because it's so beneficial to just guarantee a card on the turn that you need it. That's the whole reason you play Trade. It's to hit important key cards, and Magcargo is going to guarantee that for you. So it has to be a 5-star because it will be in top tier decks. But the versatility, as you said, there's Ludicolo, there's Swampert, there's Octillery is not the best example, but all sorts of cards that can just draw you a little bit. So powerful when you have Magcargo on the board as well. So really, really, really good ability, and that's pretty much it. One small gripe from me is that it lost an attack in the reprint stage. Don't know why that happened, but there you go. Our new Magcargo has 10 more HP, and it doesn't have the knockover attack. I'm upset with that, but regardless, we'll move on.
Yeah, man.
Going on to Articuno-GX. Again, throwback to Articuno-EX. This one does have a bit of a conversion, quite a bit different, but it does still have that ability, of course, Legendary Ascent. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to your bench during your turn, you may switch it with your active. If you do, you may move any number of water energy from your other Pokemon to this Pokemon. So it's the same as Aero Trail on Tapu Koko-GX. And just like Tapu Koko again, it can do for 2 water and a colourless 130, which is the same as Sky High Claws. And then you look down at that GX attack, Cold Crush GX. Discard all energy from both active Pokemon. A little bit worse than Tapu Thunder GX, which is a real letdown for this card. I think that's where it could have seen play. If this had a powerful GX attack, I could see it being thrown into things like Aqua Box, because it's almost like a blind spot in the Aqua Box deck. Ice Beam GX is like a panic button move where you're trying to N and hope that they don't have a Guzma to get out of paralysis. So had Articuno had a good GX attack, it could really have seen play. Right now, Cold Crush is just, you're in a bad spot. You don't have a Lapras set up, and you just have 1 energy. You're going to try and tempo-wise slow down your opponent if they're playing an energy acceleration deck as well, which isn't really the case when there's things like Zoroark around, and Buzzwole can function off 1 energy in lots of cases. It's not till like the mid to late game where they're going to be spamming their B-strings anyway, and then it's probably too late for you. So I don't think Articuno's that good. I think the biggest downside for me is that the Aqua Box deck is so based on Brooklet Hill to search out their Pokemon, and that just completely ignores the ability of Legendary Ascent, so you're having to spend Ultra Balls, which isn't great because you want to really spend them on Lele's and Octillery. So having that for the Articuno doesn't feel great, and you're only ever going to play this as a one-of, if at all, in that deck. So you can do it just because, your Lapras can get punched in the face, it tanks a hit, then you just jump in with the Articuno. But overall, I think it's a little bit weak to spend a one-of in that fashion.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, personally. Next up, we have Feraligatr. This is another reprint. This is actually, I think this is pretty true to the card, if I'm honest. 160 HP stage 2 is obviously, we've got all the usual caveats. This is stage 2, there's going to be consistencies. This was actually a really, really strong deck back in the day. Mm-hmm. Downpour, as often as you like during your turn, you may discard a water energy from your hand. Simple. you'd initially be like, well, why are we discarding water energy from our hand? That doesn't feel right. Turns out for 2 water energy, you have Riptide that does 10 damage, plus 20 more for each water in your discard pile, and you can then shuffle them back into your deck. So all of a sudden, Riptide could be doing some real numbers. The fact it starts at a base number is nice. It means that things like Choice Band, even without shuffling energy in, you're still going to be doing damage. But actually, this can ramp up pretty quickly. If you think about all of the ways to get energy into the discard, essentially. Being able to search them out and sycamore them, being able to use them for Ultra Balls, that kind of thing is going to be the best way to discard these in Standard. In Expanded, we have things like Battle Compressor, that kind of thing, even Archie's Ace in the Hole to be able to get some Feraligatrs out without having to set up Stage 2s, which is fun. Unfortunately, the Stage 2 caveat is the biggest downside, even with things like Brooklet Hill and Octillery as a water-based deck. I think there's going to be inherent inconsistencies. In general, I think the attack doesn't do enough consistently enough. Once you've done this big swing for maybe 190 to kill a Buzzwole, you then have to worry about getting another 9 energy in the discard next turn. And that's going to be one of the biggest issues. Being able to constantly get these energy back into the bin. There's nowhere near as much support as there was back then when Feraligatr was good. And unfortunately, I think it's whilst the card is pretty much exactly true, it's just been a straight upgrade with HP and damage and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, it hasn't stood the test of time because there's not as many ways to be discarding energy to deal with these huge 190 plus HP Pokemon right now.
Yeah, it's just really terrible. But I used to love this card, and artwork appreciation, 10 out of 10. There you go.
There you go.
Next up, we have Kyogre. This is another potential for Aqua Box. I think this one has a bit more potential than the Articuno does. It carries the dual splash attack for water colorless, doing 30 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, I mean, there used to be an Empoleon that did this like years ago from Majestic Dawn, and it won Worlds because of this like early spread damage stuff. And let's be honest, it's pretty easy to get dual splash rolling early. And doing these 30 damage pokes is really relevant for 60 HP basic Pokemon. It can be a real threat. It carries 130 hit points. We've seen how important the Volcanion Prism Star has been to the Aqua Box deck for doing that preliminary 20 damage spread that it can do. This does the same but cheaper. And not only is it the same but cheaper, but you're limited to only 1 copy of the Volt Prism. So this could be your get out of jail free card if that's prized. It does carry a second attack, Grand Wave, Water Colorless does 120, and you can't use it during your next turn, just like the Lapras' attack, really. But if you do this dual splash attack, it can lead into a Grand Wave KO with like a Choice Band sometimes, so even that's reasonable. I think it's a good one-of to be playing in Aqua Box. Not guaranteed, but I can see it having the slot just because dual splash early on sets up Lapras so nicely in many matchups, so that's worth it in my opinion, especially because it has 130 hit points, so it's annoying for Zoroark decks, which is where you want it to be shining, really. Yeah,
definitely. Whilst Volcanion's spread is really, really important, a lot of the time you need to hit 1 or 2 Pokemon with it anyway, so you're still checking all of the boxes that Volcanion hits, plus it's like 1 extra Volcanion, so I think this could sneak in. I don't think it's by any means staple, but with people considering things like Hooper, Tapu Koko, that kind of thing, I could see this being pretty much a straight upgrade to those just because you have acceleration to it pretty nicely and you actually have a second attack as well, which you have access to. Next up, we have Ludicolo. I was right, it was a World Championship deck. 2005, there you go. Ludicolo is a Stage 2, 140 HP. Has the ability Swing Dance. Once during a turn, you may draw a card. Now you can see why it's fantastic with Magcargo, because once during a turn, you search for a card and put it into your hand. That's really, really good. It also Magcargo also really benefits its attack. Circular Steps for Water DCE to 70, plus 10 more for each Pokemon in play, excluding this Ludicolo. So that's why we want to build our bench with 1 or 2 Ludicolos and then 1 or 2 Magcargos to essentially be getting 2 free computer searches per turn and then a supporter on top of that, which is really, really nice. It has access to Brooklet Hill as one of the more consistent sort of setup style attacks. or setup style stage 2 decks, I should say. And I think in combination with Bridget, this actually won't be insanely inconsistent. It's still a stage 2 deck, so I'm saying that with a pinch of salt. But I think there's definitely way more inconsistent stage 2 decks out there. You also have Splash Energy to be able to try and cycle these Ludicolos as well, which is nice. One of the big downsides is it is 2 energy, but we do have things like Aqua Patch and DC, of course, to be able to negate that too. This is actually a pretty big upset. The community rated it 1 star, 36.2% of you did. We're actually rating it 3 star. We think this could be a somewhat viable non-EX archetype. There's no way this is going to be top tier. There's no way this is breaking the format. But it's a nice non-EX archetype that will pretty much always be two-shotting things pretty consistently, and sometimes may be able to push into one-shot range with the use of things like Choice Band and stuff. It should be pretty consistent, especially when you get one Ludicolo and one Magcargo up. It feels actually kind of similar to Garchomp Lucario. Once you have one stage 2 and one stage 1 up, your deck kind of starts running really, really well then. There are pros and cons over Garchomp Lucario. This damage output is generally smaller, but you don't have to use Cynthia per turn, which is a really, really big thing. I'm not 100% sold. I don't think this is going to, like I say, I don't think this is going to be broken good, but I think there's definitely some really, really nice synergies all wrapped into this set. And I think this could see some niche non-EX play. Things like Persimmon and stuff have always seen a little bit of niche play, and this feels like another kind of Persimmon Garchomp Lucario style deck that people will pick up as a pet deck and will just run with and have fun with.
Yeah, I agree to that. I mean, maybe I'm just set in my ways because that King of the West deck back in 2005 was so cool. It literally was Ludicolo, Magcargo, and I think it just played like 4 Dunsparce as its other Pokemon, which is also in this set, which is hilarious that we're literally getting a pretty much exact reprint of a Worlds deck from that many years ago, 13 years ago. It's insane. But this ability is cool. I can actually see this being paired alongside Zoroark again. You're drawing more cards, which is cool. You have the Aqua Pact synergy with trade, and Circular Steps is actually a really powerful attack. I think a lot of people underrate how much damage this does. 70 base, and if your board is full, that's an extra 50, and your opponent has to have their own active Pokemon, of course, so that's an extra 60, and it's almost like you're forcing them to be Parasitied throughout the game for you to not get one-hit KOs, and even then you can choice band your way back into one-hit KOs, so in many ways, for me, when I saw this, it reminded me of the flop that was Empoleon from the last couple of sets. We got the metal one and the water one. Both of them did nothing, but I'm more optimistic about the Ludicolo because its damage scale's a lot nicer. It's a lot less easy to play around for your opponent because it's already got this nice baseline of 70, two-shotting things already pretty much with a choice band or just your own board in general. And the fact that you have this swing dance making it a lot better when you get rolling, and it means that you have the synergy with Magcargo to hopefully get multiple set up. So I'm a lot more optimistic. I think it could go in a Zoroark deck alongside, like, I think this and Shiftry will be ones that people attempt to build with Zoro as like sort of stage 2 hopefuls. But again, it could try and make its own sort of low tier deck alongside just itself and Magcargo as an alternative to Zoroark, because 140 hit points is annoying. Weakness to lightning instead of grass is really good for you. And, you know, it does still draw cards, and its damage output is pretty reasonable. So, one I want to test out. I think it does have some underlying potential. Next up, we have Swampert. We were actually harsher on this card than we were with Ludicolo, which is pretty surprising, as the community has flip-flopped on this one. It's a 3-star card in the community's eyes, with 33%. We said it's just got the 2. 160 HP is a really big and nice number to have, and its ability is awesome. There's no denying that. Power Draw is exactly the way it should be described. Once during a turn, you may discard a card from your hand, then draw 3 cards. Again, it has the synergy with Magcargo, and you're drawing 2 extra than the Ludicolo, so why are we calling Ludicolo better? Well, it's coming down to the attacks, really. Hydro Pump for 3 colorless does 80 base, 20 more times the amount of energy, or water energy, attached to this Pokemon. So if you go Water DCE, just like the Ludicolo, you're only doing a base of 100, whereas Ludicolo does way more. And if you're trying to stack up a bunch of water energies, even that's awkward for you. With Aqua Patch, regardless, it's still going to be really hard for you to get big one-hit KOs in this format. So I think Swampert's damage output is where it falls down as an attacker. And when it's not an attacker, that's really where things get awkward. I mean, yes, the power draw is insane, but you have to compare this to Zoroark. I mean, you're not going to put lots of Swamperts on your bench when you could have lots of Zoroarks on your bench, because it's so easy to get the Zoroarks going, and they can also attack. Swampert can't also attack, realistically, let's say. And even though it does draw more cards than Zoroark overall, it's a lot harder to get going, so it's not really the big consistency boost that we're hoping for, because it's really easy to get 3-4 Zoroarks on the board. It's not the case for Swampert, in my opinion. Even when you get the first one rolling, I think there's going to be awkward stages here and there. So I don't see it being good enough as an attacker on its own. It's also weak to grass, which is a big shame for it, because Zoropod probably isn't going anywhere. And it's just attack. Its attack is such a letdown for this card, because otherwise it screams value because it draws so much. But that really is a letdown for me, and I don't think it's good enough to be... I mean, it is a good enough ability to sort of be a Tech 101 line, but I just don't see people doing that in this format, to be honest.
I think the format's way too aggressive. I think people, as soon as they know, will see the Mudkip and kill the Mudkip, and things get awkward from there. It feels so harsh to be rating a card like this, which is actually really, really similar to Zoroark in ability. It's better in ability, a 2-star, but the fact it's one extra stage and the attack, like the numbers just don't line up very nice. So I think in general, you have to assume this card isn't going to be great. Each of your Swamperts are going to need realistically 3, sometimes even 4 energy to be getting one-shots with choice bands on important Pokemon in this format. And that means attaching 4 energy instead of a DCE that you can to a Zoroark. Yes, okay, there's differences. Zoroark gives it 2 prizes, different weaknesses, that kind of thing. But I think in general, just inherently, it's going to be difficult to get 4 energy on these Swamperts, on multiple Swamperts during a game. I think other than that, this could have been a really fantastic card. But unfortunately, there's just no current way of being able to make this attack good. If we ever get acceleration, especially, we've already got Aqua Patch, so it's unlikely, I guess. But if we ever get sort of water-specific acceleration, that we maybe have a way of building up Hydro Pump in a turn, doing 190 with a choice band. That's when the card's going to come into its own. But right now, as a stage 2, you're going to have a really, really consistent stage 2 deck. But you're always actually going to be behind your deck is going to be so sort of wonky with consistency, because you're going to have everything you need, but you can still only attach one energy per turn. So you're going to have everything you need for the next 4 turns, but it's attach, pass, attach, pass, attach, pass, then Hydro Pump, where your opponents had time to build up their tempo again, catch up with your sort of huge hand size after power drawing a million cards into your hand, and they've probably got better Pokemon on their field. So then even when the first one dies, you then have to attach, pass, and it just doesn't line up very nice. These kind of Hydro Pump attacks have never really worked outside of Rain Dance decks, and there's no way you're playing this with like a Blastoise and Expanded or something, just because maybe this is a nice one-of in Archie's toys, sure, whatever, that's fun, I guess, but I think in Standard right now, there's just no nice way of playing Swampert.
Yeah, a quick note on that, just to go back on it. Archie is pretty much where it lands in Expanded. It's just a straight upgrade to Empoleon, which saw a lot of play. So Swampert will see play in Expanded just as an Archie target, I think, for consistency. And there's actually one other point just on Counter Energy. Potentially you can play Counter Energy in this deck to make the Hydro Pump a little bit better, but the damage is still awkward. Maybe you play a bunch of Counter Energy techs, try and get them rolling while the Swampert's chill in the back, but I, again, think it's a stretch. But anyway, let's move on.
Yeah. One way you could attach a load of energy is Electrode-GX. This is a new GX from a set, 190 HP, stage 1 lightning type with extra energy bomb. Once during your turn, you may attach 5 energy cards from your discard pile to your Pokemon, except Pokemon GX or EX. Remember that. In any way you like. If you do, this Pokemon is knocked out. So very similar to Buzzap Thunder Electrode from Evolutions, which saw very, very, very niche play in Lightning decks exclusively. You essentially knock Electrode out and attach it as a double Lightning energy. This is really, that was really, really nice for exactly Lightning decks, because you had really, really strong acceleration and you also only give it one prize. This gives up two prizes. Note number one, that's giving your opponent a third of their win condition, at least, which is like crazy good. Number two, you have to get energy into the discard, which means you can't really do this early without playing a huge amount of energy and sycamoring. Well, that's like, to think about how many energy you have to have in your hand to then get into the discard with a sycamore in the first two turns of the game to then Electrode, you're going to be running a lot of energy. So in general, why aren't you running things like Max Elixir? Maybe if you're a Ultra Beast deck, Beast Ring, there's many different ways we can accelerate energy right now. So that's kind of awkward. This can attach special energy, which is cute. But in general, like, even then, you still have to find, there's no nice way of searching special energy, so you then have to naturally draw into them before you extra energy bomb yourself. And number three, this cannot attach to EX or GX Pokemon. I think if this could attach to EX or GX Pokemon, we may be having a different discussion. But the fact is, there's not many non-EX decks right now that need this kind of energy acceleration that can give up two prizes and have space for an Electrode-GX and a metric ton of energy in their deck. There's so many awkward points about building this deck. It'll work maybe once or twice in testing, but I think in general, there's nothing that really stands out to me right now. Things like Electrode Prime have worked in the past, but again, that gave up one energy. That sort of attached energy here, there, and everywhere to multiple different attackers that you needed in that matchup. So maybe, again, this is like a counterbox style deck. But just like this is so, giving your opponent two prizes is so detrimental. To get counter energy online, you just have to give them one prize. So you're already making your own win condition a little bit worse anyway, because you're overextending into their win condition. So I can see the strength of this card. Attaching 5 energy is crazy good, and I think this actually could be one that you can see from the community rating. We're at least 2 out here, and a large percentage of people rated this 3 stars. But in general, I think we think this is just way too niche to see play. Electro Ball is pretty bad, 2 energy, not even DCE for 50. It's like this, it's so mediocre, it's not even fun. And then Crush and Burn for the same cost as 30. You can discard any amount of energy from your Pokemon. This is 50 more for each energy discarded this way. So this is similar to Lost Burn from Magnezone, except you do a base 30 as well, and they don't go into the Lost Zone. That's a nice GX attack, to be fair. But again, it's 2 energy on a Pokemon that you can't access counter energy on. So this is going to be 2 attachments, or I guess Buzzap Thundering an Electrode to an Electrode-GX, but then you've given your opponent a prize anyway. So, this, like, the whole self-destruct Electrode thing has always been cool in the past, and sometimes it's worked, but the, 2 or 3 different levels of awkwardness through extra energy bomb, I think, means that this, at least in the foreseeable future, won't be good enough for standard.
Yeah, I agree. It's super awkward to get 5 in the bin, and even more awkward to give up 2 prize cards. I mean, the ideal situation is that you somehow build a deck where you can use Crush and Burn GX to discard enough energy to get a big one-hit KO. Electrode gets hit, tanks, and then you extra energy bomb for other attackers on your board. So then at least it's been hit. So then you could think about it in that respect of only giving up 1 prize, I guess. But that's a stretch, man. And I can't think of any deck that can realistically do that sort of Crush and Burn combo where you're getting a bunch of energy on the board just to take them off, just to put them back on. It feels really weird. So, yeah, really bad card, I think. And I respect that people want to try and make it work, but there's just too much wrong here, I think. Next up, we have a Lantern. This is only really being mentioned because of its ability, Energy Grounding. Both us and the community rated this one of the worst in the entire set. Once during your turn, when any of your Pokemon is knocked out by your opponent's attacks, you may use this ability. Choose a basic energy card attached to the knocked out Pokemon and move it to this Pokemon. So it's an inbuilt EXP share. Its attack does for lightning, colorless 70. And you may discard all lightning energy from this Pokemon if you do 70 more damage. So 140, 170 with a choice band is reasonable, but you need to be playing lightning energies for it to work. Energy grounding is okay. I mean, EXP share, there's been times when it saw play. When there wasn't tool removal in the format, EXP share saw a reasonable amount of play, to be fair, just because people couldn't really affect it. And now that there is Field Blower, EXP share's off the map, and this is a new way to try and retain energy on your board for the likes of Coco, Rayquaza, and Xerneas. But the awkward thing is you're trying to set up stage ones in order to do that, and I think overall you'd rather just have other things on your board, like an Octillery, for example, or something else like that. It's a big commitment just to try and retain an energy here and there. I still think EXP share is not great in the meta right now because of the amount of Field Blower being played, but I just really don't see Lantern seeing much use.
Yeah, I completely agree. Next up, we have Manectric. This is a really, really interesting card. Stage 1, 110 HP. Ability Volt Star. If you're going second, you may place this card face down from your hand. This is basically a basic Pokemon if you're going second. We've seen a very, very similar ability to Talonflame on Talonflame. This is actually better than Talonflame's Gale Wings because Gale Wings could only be the active. This can actually be... you can play as many of these as you want, which is nice. So the other three Manectrics in your deck aren't necessarily dead. Obviously, it's very unlikely for you to draw all four of your Manectrics. But, one of your four Talonflames that you ran in your deck, at most one was going to be played. At least in this case, maybe you'll get the extra use out of one or two. Similarly to Aeroblitz as well, we have Double Charge, which is a kind of setup attack. For one lightning, you do 40, and you may attach up to 2 basic energy cards from your hand to one of your benched Pokemon. So you can letter out a couple of energy and attach them through Double Charge. The big benefit of Talonflame over Manectric is the fact that it's colorless. Manectric pretty much solely works in lightning decks because you have to use lightning energy to use Double Charge, meaning that this is solely lightning acceleration, whereas Talonflame saw play in multiple different archetypes because it was a colorless energy, so it was in general just able to set up whatever you wanted. Manectric is weak to fighting, which is another really, really awkward thing, especially with the amount of Buzzwole running around right now. So you're not going to want to be running a lightning deck. This is, I think in general, whilst we're looking at this set and I'm trying to keep as close to this set as possible, looking slightly to the future, lightning is a lot of support next set, and I think all of this doesn't really synergize with Manectric as well. I think there's not much reason to be using Manectric over just running more consistent draw supporters to try and build your board up, maybe like trying elixirs, that kind of thing, over just trying to get this cute Manectric setup in the early turns. Talonflame saw success, and I can see people trying this out, but I think in general they will quickly realize Talonflame was very good. Talonflame was good for other reasons other than the fact that it was this had this acute ability and called setup attack. It's actually the fact that this is a colorless Pokemon that was the big reason Talonflame saw success.
Yeah, I mean, you need to have lightning energy. I can't see what this is powering up. And you need to have energy in your opening hand as well as this card in your opening hand. So the amount of times that you won't have that specific hand to help you is just ridiculous. So I think Manectric is really poor. Next up, onto the Psychic types. We'll kick off with the Banette. It has the ability Red Eye that reads the same as Target Whistle pretty much. When you evolve this Pokemon from your hand, you may have your opponent's basic Pokemon from their discard pile onto their bench. There's not too many reasons why you'd want to do this right now in the format. Maybe try and increase their amount of Pokemon in play for certain damage buffs. Maybe you're putting an easy Pokemon to knock out back onto their board so you can gust it up again. But again, it's a stage 1. It's really awkward to try and play this card. Even if you're playing a Banette-GX deck, which we'll get onto next, I don't see this having the slot because it is, once again, too niche. As an attacker, enemy show for a Psychic colorless, put damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like, equal to the number of Pokemon your opponent has in play, synergizes with its own ability, but it's still never going to be doing meaningful damage in many cases, so I think us in the community are pretty much in agreement that it's not that strong. It's a 1.5 by the community because 37.1% said it was a 1-star and 37.1% also said it was a 2-star, so that's why you're seeing the half grade in there, but overall, I think it's just a little bit too niche. Target Whistle saw play in exactly Night March because it was turbo enough and it had puzzles to try and make it work. Banette doesn't really have the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think the better Banette is actually Banette-GX. This is a really, really cool card. 190 HP, Stage 1 GX Pokemon, reprint from one of the older EX sets, which is cool. Has the ability Shady Move. If this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, once during your turn, you may move 1 damage counter from one Pokemon to another Pokemon. So not only can you rearrange their own damage counters, you can actually move one of your own damage counters onto their side, which is cool. It's like a net gain of 20 health, 20 damage, that kind of thing, which is cool. That you will be nice in certain situations. Maybe you do 180 to a Pokemon and just pop a counter on next turn and try to take 2 prizes in a turn. That's really, really nice. Shadow Chant for a single Psychic Energy does 30 damage and does 10 more for each supporter in your discard pile. You can't use more than 10 supporter cards for this attack. So it actually caps at 130. 1 for 130 is fantastic. 1 for 160 is even better with a choice band. That's really, really good ratios. The big sort of selling point of this card is the fact that it's a purple card. It's a Psychic type, meaning that Buzzwole dies to you having 4 supporters in the bin. Well, that's really not that difficult, especially if you play a high supporter count Banette. You're going to be maybe going down the Zoroark route without playing a Zoroark deck just to be boosting your damage. Maybe playing a high Bridget count along with your draw supporters, which is nice. Maybe just playing a huge draw supporter count to be able to discard a lot with Sycamore. We have things like Acro Bike, which we've seen in this set, and Mysterious Treasure, which you can search the whole deck out, which is nice. Discarding and doing more damage at the same time. So there's lots of ways to be able to discard supporters, lots of different avenues the deck can go down for building styles, which is really, really nice. We also have the exact same GX attack as Decidueye Tomb Hunt for a single Psychic Energy that you put 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand. We've seen how useful that can be on Decidueye. It's never really a bad GX attack to have. There's another of these World Championship decks, and I actually think this could be a really, really good answer to exactly Buzzwole and potentially Malamar as well for Worlds. It's really, really... Its sort of prospects are really, really nice. The biggest issue is the fact that it's Dark Week. Zoroark had a fantastic showing at NAIC, and essentially I think is one of the biggest winners of this format again, and doesn't seem to be going anywhere, especially for Worlds. I think Zoroark variants will 100% be the most popular archetypes at Worlds. If you lump them all together, and you're never going to face enough Buzzwoles to counteract all of those Zoroarks. So you've just got to dodge and weave. If you can dodge and weave, I actually think Banette's really, really good, though.
Yeah, I agree. I think Banette is really, really awesome. It's almost like Decidueye Light in many ways. The Shady Move is really nice for you. Setting up these damage counters, as Jack said, it does 160 for 1 energy and a choice band. Pop 1 damage from your Pokemon onto a Lele, that's ready to go, which is awesome. And again, just throughout the game, you're getting these little hints of value here and there. It's rare that this little heal of 10 is going to change too much for you, but try to make it that little bit more awkward and set up math. Again, things like Zoroark. If you're playing Banette alongside Zoroark, even that 1 damage counter being moved means that Zoro can now KO baby Buzzwoles, which is cool. If you're leaving the Banette in the back for other Pokemon, so that's really reasonable. I think Zoro Banette will probably be an archetype, as Jack said. It's probably unfavored in Mirror, which is something you have to consider. But having nice coverage for Buzzwole is a big deal, and it's been something that Zoro's been yearning for a while. People are going to big extents playing 2 Mew-EX in their deck, which is sometimes really detrimental in its own right. If you're trying to play like a Banette box style deck, Banette with other attackers, you do have Acro Bikes and Mysterious Treasures, so there's plenty of ways to discard lots of supporter cards. So there could be an avenue there as well if you're trying to play Banette with other attackers that maybe can help you out against Zoroark, for example. That could be an avenue to go down, because just a 1 energy attacker that can do this much is just really, really tempting. So people will build around this, not just in Zoro, but for other decks as well. It's one that I'm really excited to see, because there's so much intrigue towards this card. And yeah, its ability is slept on as well, by the way. I think it's a really, really good ability. Next up, we have Deoxys. This is a pretty solid 3-star card, in our opinion. The community agrees. It has the Psychic attack, which reads exactly the same as the Evolution's Mewtwo. You do 20 plus 20 more damage times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So it can be a new Buzzwole Slayer. Unfortunately, it has 120 hit points and not 130, so it's actually in this sort of role a little bit weaker. But it does come with one less retreat, which is actually really nice for you in some situations. And it can have a second attack if it's going to be used in Malamar as well. For 2 Psychic and a Colourless, you do 120, discard an energy from this Pokemon. So, as we've seen things like Baby Hooper and the Pressure Mewtwo go into the Mali decks, perhaps Deoxys will do the same, having a one-hit KO attack potential against the likes of Mirror Matches, the regular Necrozma-GX, as well as Buzzwole-GX. But at the same time, it has a 2 energy attack, and that's much better than the Pressure Mewtwo because it can sometimes be cheap, just finishing things off without the need for many Malamars in play, or at least leaving those Psychic recharges for some other bench Pokemon for you for later turns. So that's the real pull towards Deoxys. It's another non-GX option in Malamar decks, as well as the fact that it can overtake Mewtwo as we move into the next format.
Yeah, I think that was the other thing I was going to say. I think with Mewtwo going, potentially, with Mewtwo and Mew and Baby Mew all going, actually, we could potentially need a new answer for Buzzwole if it does continue to be strong in this format, and I think Deoxys fills that role pretty nicely. Next up, we have Mr. Mime. There's 2 Mr. Mime GXs. That we have the Magic Evens and Magic Odds Mr. Mimes. They're the exact same card, except one prevents even damage, one prevents odd. We're looking at the Magic Evens, but just bear in mind Magic Odds is potentially in this set as well, and could be, well, is pretty much the exact same card other than the ability. 150 HP, Psychic type is super weak for a GX, weaker than Lele, and at this point, I think 190 is pretty standard right now, so 40 HP below the bar is really, really unfortunate. Magic Evens prevent all damage done to this Pokemon from your opponent's attacks if that damage is exactly 20, 40, 60, 80, essentially even numbered damage. That's kind of... So initially you're like, wow, I'm immune to 50% of the decks in the format immediately. That's great. Well, unfortunately, 2 cards break that down. Fighting Fury Belt and Choice Band, they turn your even damage into odd. And that very point essentially makes these cards useless because every deck is running either Fighting Fury Belt or Choice Band, or 99% of decks are running Fighting Fury Belt or Choice Band, which will flip their damage into the right one. It means that every deck has an answer to the respective Mr. Mime right now. And because every deck has an answer, this can never be the kind of wall card it's meant to be. If we didn't have Choice Band and Fighting Fury Belt, I think it would still be awkward because the decks naturally run multiple Pokemon anyway, so they will have attackers that will get around this at some point, but it would be much more reliable because you wouldn't have Choice Bands and Fury Belts in every deck to flip this damage into the one that dodges your ability. But even then, I still think it'd be a pretty weak card, especially given that the other 2 cards, the other 2 attacks, are really weak as well. For Psychic Colorless Breakdown, for each card in your opponent's hand, put 1 damage on their active Pokemon. This is really going to get Zoro, and pretty much exactly that. A lot of decks right now are going to be probably maintaining maximum 7 cards in hand, sometimes maybe more, but a lot of the time it'll be maximum 7, maybe even less. So in the best case scenario, this is place 7 counters on your opponent's active Pokemon, gets around resistance, but also can't be boosted by Choice Band, things like that. So, this is never really going to be a strong attack. And Life Streak GX fully heals Mr. Mime. Well, 150 HP is so flimsy, it's probably not going to be surviving hits. It's probably just going to be dead anyway. So, unfortunately, due to Choice Band and Fighting Fury Belt being in the format, we have ways to manipulate our damage to get around Magic Evens or Magic Odds, whichever you're deciding to play. And because of that, Mr. Mime, I think, goes straight in the bulk pile.
Yep, complete bulk. Loses to Garb, loses to tools, loses to scalable damage, and decks that happen to hit odd numbers. So, pretty rubbish. Next up, we start off with the fighting types. This time, we're going to be Regirock. It's a 120 hit point basic Pokemon, weak to grass, with a 3 retreat cost. It's notable for its first attack, really. For a fighting energy, it does Enhanced, Stomp, 20 base, and if it has a tool attached, 20 more damage. And this is a really nice number because alongside Strong Energy or Diancie, you're doing 60 turn 1. And this is really good for dealing with baby Pokemon, really. Things trying to evolve up. And again, with the combination of Strong and Diancie, you can then hit pretty much every attempting to evolve basic Pokemon. And that's really good early game pressure for you. Regirock is also not weak to Psychic, so that's also beneficial. Looking at things like the Zoroark decks, they're oftentimes trying to use things like Mew-EX to combat early baby Buzzwole pressure. Well, the Regirock is going to withstand that much nicer. Obviously, it has 120 hit points, but it requires them to have the full board. And while you munch through Zoruas, that's going to get a lot harder for them. So, really, really good early game attack. Obviously, with that Choice Band hitting into other EX and GX Pokemon, it's going to be really nice. Easy 2-hit KOs for one attachment. So, it's a potential extra card to be thrown into Buzzrock, and I think it'll definitely be played. I think Hammer Arm for Fighting Colorless is 100 damage. Discard the top card of your opponent's deck. I think it will be used very sparingly, but for the first attack alone, definitely worth noting.
Yeah, Enhanced Thump is really, really strong. I think me, Joe, and a couple of our friends, Tamao and Luke, have also had a lot of fun with Fighting Box recently, and this feels like just a straight upgrade some of the cards in that deck. Enhanced Stomp is so energy efficient for 1 energy. In the exact format where we've got all of this fighting support, I think Regirock is an instant include to a lot of fighting decks. Next up, we have Alolan Raticate-GX, one that we saw ages ago in Japan, I think nearly a year ago. It's finally been thrown into a European set, or an English set. Stage 1, 200 HP, Dark type. Weakness to fighting is one very, very notable, unfortunate part about the card. I think that's pretty much what's going to hold the card back, but in general, it doesn't have very good attacks anyway. Chuck Away for no energy does 40 damage, and you discard up to 2 cards from your hand, 40 times damage, and you discard up to 2 cards from your hand, so that does 40 damage for each card you discard in this way. Considering this is a free attack, and sort of you don't need any setup, this is a nice way of like milling your hand down. But it's a stage 1, so it's never going to be used as kind of a pseudo battle compressor. You need to find the cards first, so that's never really going to be a nice way of trying to accelerate your or ditch stuff to try and get discard combos. So it never really quite all fits there, which isn't great. And also it can only discard 2 cards, whereas compressor discarded 3. So that's super awkward. We then have Hyperfang for Dark DCE, which does 150, which is really, really strong. But flip a coin, if tails, this attack does nothing. So 50% of the time, this is doing absolutely nothing for 3 energy. So all of a sudden, that 150 damage looks a little bit worse. Even rounding up, this is only doing consistently 80 damage if you flip 1 heads, 1 tails. That's not great, is it? 3 for 80 is not good on a stage 1 fighting weak Pokemon. The only other attack this has is, of course, the GX attack, Item-Maniac-GX. This does, for, again, no energy, Item-Maniac lets you search your discard for up to 6 items, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So this is like double Banette-GX attack, but you have to get items. That's pretty awkward, because you don't always, like, items aren't the answer to sort of the problems the decks have. Things like DCEs and stuff are going to be what you want to be grabbing. So Item Maniac's never really going to be getting exactly what you want. And even if it is, again, similarly with some of the cards we've already talked about, N is pretty much one of the biggest reasons why some of these cards can't be played right now. So you're going to get 6 fantastic items back, maybe even 4 puzzles, and they're all going to go straight back into your deck, and you're going to have to find them again anyway. So that's really unfortunate. We do have things like Alolan Raticate, the baby one, which has Enhanced Fang for, again, no energy. If you have a tool on, you do 60 damage. If it's a choice band, you're doing 90. That's cool. That's free. That's a free 90 damage, essentially. Do that in the early game, then switch over to a Rotom-style deck in the late game, once you've ditched all of these with your Alolan Raticates getting knocked out and chucking them away. And you can have cool Rotom synergies, and then you can get your items back. You'll get your tools back in the late game to finish things off. But this is never going to work. Let's be honest. There's too many moving parts. You're weak to dark, and having Rotom as your only answer pretty much means that you have to spend probably 2 or 3 turns with fighting weak Pokemon in your actively getting them knocked out. just to ditch tools, just to Rotomotor. So you have to go behind against a Buzzwole deck just to try and go ahead again, but you won't even be going ahead, you'll be just evening the playing field. So in general, there's too many awkward parts to Alolan Raticate. It's a fantastic one for collectors because this card has not been seen, or an English version of this card has not been seen for nearly a year now, but I think for players, this is pretty much this is one of the worst GXs in the set.
Oh yeah, it's a spicy meme, but really, really terrible. Next up, we have Sableye. It again is slightly different with this new set. It gets 10 more hit points, but it does have the ability Excavate, just like the old days. Once during a turn, you may look at the top card of your deck, put that card on top of your deck, or discard that card. So you can see to the right there are a few cards that would benefit from some additional discards, like that Feraligatr, Banette getting rid of supporters, Rotom getting rid of tools, Malamar hopefully hitting Psychic Energies. But overall, we think that it's not really worth dedicating a bench space to this. I think you'd rather just play Acro Bikes overall, because you're having a high chance of getting the correct discard for you on like an insta play thing, and you can also increase your hand size. So Sableye feels weak in terms of this ability. Disable is actually annoying for a colorless. It does 10. Choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. They can't use that attack during your opponent's next turn, but I mean, there's Guzma, there's Float Stones. They can definitely get around this. So yeah, its ability is pretty much just outclassed by the likes of Acro Bike and such. So, and I mean, if there's a good card on the top of your deck, it's done nothing that turn as well, other than give you information, I guess. So, yeah, pretty weak overall.
Yeah, definitely. Next up, we have Celesteela. This is a sort of another card that feels kind of like Baby Buzzwole, which is really, really impressive. 140 HP, basic metal Pokemon with resistance to fighting. That in general is a really, really good sort of outset because you're going to be resisting one of the best types in the game, and you're already a massive 140 HP Pokemon, and you only give it one prize. So that's really, really good as a Buzzwole, as a lead against Buzzwole. You then have the Moonraker attack for Metal and 4 colorless energy. Don't stop listening. It does 160 damage. Okay, you're like, this sounds awkward. But if the total of both players' prizes is exactly 6, this attack's cost is only metal. So 1 for 160, with a choice band 1 for 190, you can one-shot a Buzzwole for 190. That's pretty incredible for exactly 1 energy. It is on exactly 1 turn. It's similar to Sledgehammer, except it's a little bit more awkward, and you can't. There's not often turns you can get multiple uses out of it, because if you Moonraker to take some prizes, you then can't Moonraker again next turn, or for the much cheaper cost. But that 1 exact turn is going to be really, really strong. We think in general, Beast Box actually gets a real strong boost from this set. Stakataka, I think, is one of the best, could be one of the best partners for Naganadel, maybe even just as a metal deck in general. And I think Celesteela is immediately put into that. I don't think it's anywhere near as impactful as Baby Buzzwole as a singular attacker, because Baby Buzzwole has so much support anyway. It doesn't even need to be hitting that exact turn of Sledgehammer. It still has a huge amount of support. But I think in metal decks, especially in Beast and in Beast Box, in Ultra Beast metal decks, this will definitely be a one-of, just to be able to take one huge knockout, especially as you're able to front-load an energy in the early game, and then on the turns, maybe you're taking a Moonraker. Hopefully you're able to use some Beast Rings and that kind of thing to be able to set up some attackers for the later stages of the game as well. It's a really, really big swing for 1 energy. Obviously, it can be played around very similarly to Baby Buzzwole, but it also, because it's the total of both players' prizes, you can also manipulate it on your side as well. So you can force them to maybe have to take a 2-prize Pokemon or have to take a 1-prize Pokemon just to avoid being Moonrakered. And if they're doing that, perhaps they're not producing the optimal strategy, which again is always really, really beneficial, especially in some of these grindier decks, which Beast Box feels like a deck that really can grind people out of resources. It's not a big one-shot deck. It's just try and do pokes every turn, push people out of the game, especially with Stakataka, which now reduces all of the damage the deck takes as well. So that kind of strategy is going to be really, really beneficial for Celesteela.
Yeah, as you said, just super efficient on that turn. Sometimes taking a big knockout, and what I think is really big is that the opponent pretty much has to gust around this boy. 140 hit points on a non-GX is annoying as heck to deal with. They want to keep their prize trade up. You're forcing that 7 prize game, and if they're not using N, that's amazing for you, especially for these Ultra Beast decks, because they're probably playing Oranguru or nothing in terms of their draw support. So anything you can do to stop your opponent N'ing you is so big, because you get to keep your hand size to do stuff, and because you can just Ultra Space him out, the Ganondorf retreats for 1, which is very easy, and you're probably playing lots of float stones because of those chunky stack attackers. Get into that Celesteela, take that big knockout, force the opponent to Guzma around you, feels really strong to me. So yeah, really good card, I think, and definitely one to experiment with for these Beast Box decks, which, as Jack said, we think have a lot of potential. Next up, we have the first Prism Star, I think, of the set. We'll remind you of the little rule here. You can only have, you can't have more than one Prism Star card with the same name in your deck, and if a Prism Star card would go to the discard pile, put it in the lost zone instead. And Jirachi here has the ability, Wish Upon a Star. If you took this Pokemon as a face-down prize card during your last turn, and your bench isn't full before you put it into your hand, you may put it onto your bench and take one more prize card. So, it has to go into your prizes. So that's 1 in 10 games that will happen. Then you need to have a free bench every time you're taking a prize, which is already ruling out a bunch of decks, and anyone that's playing Parallel City against you is ruling out that factor even more, which is amazing. And then you need to hit it when it's not in either your last 2 slots, probably, because a lot of the time you finish the game on a 2 prize knockout. So realistically, it has to be in one of 4 prize spaces that's going to be beneficial for you. So it's even lower than a 1 in 10 chance of it even being a useful card at all. And also, if ever you're up against a Garbodor deck or an Alolan Muck or anything random like that, it's not going to work, or if you've been Shadow Stitched. So many reasons why this card is bad. Turns this card into meme tier, I think. It's similar to a Greedy Dice in that you flip it over and it's a coin flip. Obviously, it's better than Greedy Dice, but you can only play 1 copy, and you need to play a deck that can afford to only play with 4 bench the whole game, pretty much, and that's just really bad. So overall, Jirachi Prism Star, I think, isn't going to be a card that goes into every deck. It's in fact going to be a card that goes into no decks. Yeah,
this is pretty bad. Next up, we have Metagross. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. This is kind of another big dispute in our sort of community majority rating. I think this is off of the back of the Stevens Resolve big upset. So I can see why the community have rated it 2.5 if they've rated Steven so highly. Again, we've said it's pretty bad. It's pretty much going in exactly Metagross as a one-of, and I think Metagross isn't seeing very little play right now. I think one made top 128 of NAIC. That's not impressive. That's not enough for a deck to push forward. There's been a lot of talk about it post-rotation, but I think in general, the card's not great anyway. 170 HP is massive for a stage 2, though. That's going to be tanky. That's the same HP as a Lele. So that's a pretty big boy. Metal type again is also nice. Fire is nowhere right now. So this genuinely has 170 hit points, which is huge. Extend, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, your turn does not end when you play Steven's Resolve. So that's the benefit. That's the package. You have a supporter that lets you search for 3 cards and put them into your hand. That's nice, but this has to be active, and I don't think you're ever running more than one of this guy in Metagross, because you don't have the Beldums and Metangs to be able to spare for non-Metagross GXs. So I don't think you're ever running more than one of. Maybe you're running more than one of, but you're never getting more than one of out. So you have to get this out, and this has to be active, which means it has to have a float stone on it, which means any turn your opponent can Field Blower. You can't ever safely promote this without finding float stone again. So you can already start to see issues. You then have to remember you have to find Steven's Resolve on the turn you're using it, which means you're probably running a higher count of Steven's Resolve. If that's the case and you ever don't get this Metagross out, you're then running 4 bad supporters in your deck that aren't going to be doing anything. So, like, this feels like another card where it's barely ever going to be doing anything in like 90% of games. The ideal board setup won't be the board setup you achieve because the format's too aggressive, there's too many moving pieces, and the big combo, like, what are you even getting from 3 cards when you've got Metagross out already? You need to do this maybe once, and you have your board set up. But what are you doing with that board setup once you've done it? It just all doesn't really work, I think. The whole package is really, really cute, but I don't think there's ever too much reason to even consider Metagross as a better Stage 2 deck than some of the others we have out there, just because of this ability. Meteor Mash for 1 metal does 60 and does 120 during your next turn. 1 for 120 is really good. But again, we have Guzma to reset this damage. We have... so that's the biggest thing, essentially. We have even things like Escape Rope and stuff like that. There's loads of ways to get out of this Meteor Mash, and you have that, like, the way Metagross is built, it can power up other attackers that will be doing better than 60/120 damage. So it's never really going to be used as an attacker. One buff to Metagross, I think, in general, is the new Beldums. They have the ability Conductive Body, which, as long as this is your active Pokemon, it has a retreat cost of 1 less for each Beldum on the bench. So it's similar to Magnemite's ability. This is pretty much a straight upgrade for Metagross decks, Beldum-wise, because your Beldums pretty much always will have free retreat, in the early turns at least. But I don't think Metagross is particularly a buff for Metagross decks in general, and even if it is, I don't think Metagross pre-rotation and possibly even post-rotation is a strong enough archetype to really benefit from this at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is not salvation for Steven in any way. Metagross's damage output is terrible. 170, yes, it's big, but there are still one-hit KO archetypes out there. If you're thinking about things like Zoroark, sure, but Meteor Mash, they'll just Acerola Loop or Max Potion around that anyway and out-resource you of your healing cards. So I don't see it beating any deck, really, of the top-tier stuff, so it's probably going to be really poor. Next up, we have Scizor-GX. A little bit more optimistic about this card. It's another sort of reprint in Spirit, I guess. 210 hit points. Has the ability Danger Perception. If this Pokemon's remaining hit points is 100 or less, its attacks do 80 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness or resistance, which is really cool. It has Steel Wing, which is really nice, that goes alongside this. During your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. So you go from a 210 hit point stage 1 to effectively having to get hit for 240. So it's like a big stage 2, really, and isn't going anywhere very quickly. I believe it has resistance to Psychic in here as well. I can't remember because I've actually covered it up. Not weakness to Grass that you saw on the old Scizor, which is even more reduction. So at least one of the one-hit KO decks in terms of Malamar is going to really struggle dealing with this Scizor, and many two-shot decks are also going to struggle with this. So Danger Perception could be live in many situations, I think. It does have Crosscut GX as well for 3 colorless. It does 100. If your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolved Pokemon, 100 more damage. So I think a high choice band count is going to be really important here. Steel Wing needs to be doing 2-hit KOs to be doing anything really. So that's going to be integral, and Crosscut also looks to need choice band to do anything relevant. I think the real downsides for Scizor is its attachment cost is awkward. If you're playing metals and DCs, that can get punished by E-hammers and such, and that feels like something you're going to need. And also non-GXs, I think you have Crosscut, which is awesome for a big GX knockout, and Steel Wing is nice to be two-shotting, again, GX Pokemon, but for non-GXs, Steel Wing, unless you're dealing with evolving basics, isn't going to be doing much. So they can be throwing Baby Buzzwolves and other annoying, tanky, like 120, 130 hit point Pokemon in your way, starting to trigger off Danger Perception or get close to that sort of line of getting him in range of a one-hit KO the following turn, whilst you're just doing nothing really. So a high choice band count is going to be integral. A high Guzma count and some other gusting is also going to be really important for this guy to be doing the job right. But I think inherently it's tanky, and Steel Wing, when it is hitting into GX Pokemon, is very potent. And Again, we have this nice Celesteela for a single turn to get a big one-hit KO as well. So there's something here, I think. With that Scyther as well, you have some nice way to get multiple into play quite consistently. Even if you don't have Bridget, maybe it means you don't need to play Bridget at all. And that can be really useful as well. So there's something here. I think everyone agrees that there's something around this card. But it's just whether or not it can carry it far enough, because you can play around Age of Perception to some extent with certain damage modifiers and such. And if that's the case, then Steel Wing's doing, relatively speaking, just poking around, and that may not be enough to win the game.
Yeah, I think this is a really hard card to evaluate, because I think there's a lot of really good selling points about the card, but I have no idea how to build this. It feels like we're lacking a partner right now. I think this is definitely one to pick up. I think this could be really, really good. But I think, personally, we're just lacking a partner, at least off the bat. I'm sure there's something out there that someone will have thought of. But right now, I think there's definitely potential, but I can't see the 60 cards in front of me that is successful. I think it needs someone a little bit brainier than me to build a successful deck with this. But there's so many good things about this deck. The big damage plus resistance is nice. They're kind of anti-synergistic, but even so, just big damage is always going to be good, and making your Pokemon harder to knock out after taking a knockout of your own is always going to be really, really useful. So I think there's something here. It's just I have no idea how to make this card good yet. One day, maybe. I don't know. Next up, we have Stakataka, and this I think I know how to make good, because it's just good. It's a 180 HP Ultra Beast, Metal type. Weakness to Fire, as we've said, really, really relevant right now because it's irrelevant. Resistance to Psychic, again, very, very important because there's a lot of Psychic decks going around. Essentially, Ultra Wall is what we're looking at this card for. Well, mainly at least. Your Ultra Beasts take 10 less damage from your opponent's attacks. In general, that's not great until you realize this Stakataka is stackable. So with 3 Stakatakas on your bench, your Ultra Beasts are taking 30 less. Your Ultra Beasts are taking 30 less from opponent's attacks. And that's really, really big in a deck like Beast Box. When your whole deck is these Ultra Beasts that have so much support anyway, then reducing or giving them essentially all Eviolites is crazy good. It's going to make them so much more tanky. When they do eventually go down, we have B-Strings, we have N plus Stakatakas to force really awkward situations for your opponent to try and take one-shot knockouts in the later stages of the game, which is going to be more difficult than usual. This is just a really, really strong ability. I think one of the other underlying things is against spread decks as well. Things like Buzzwole are really going to struggle with 2 or 3 Stakataka on the board. It's going to mean their snipe damage is irrelevant when they're attacking with Buzzwole-GX, and their initial pokes in the active, you're going to start balancing out some of these natural buffs that Buzzwole decks have, which is really, really strong. It's also going to mean certain Pokemon are flipped from the 2-shot range into the 3-shot range pretty nicely as well. So I think this is a really, really strong ability for all of these Ultra Beasts that are getting support right now. We have Gigaton Stomp for Metal Colorless, which is a flat 120. Pretty underwhelming, or not underwhelming, pretty, like, it's a fine attack, has no text. But 3 for 120 is fine. We have Acceleration, we have Elixirs, we have B-Strings. This is going to be set up if we need it to be. And similarly, Assembly-GX does 50 damage plus 50 more for each prize card you've taken. So this is a nice one last hurrah attack to finish off the game, to take 2 more prizes to close out a game. It's really, really strong. I think the GX attack is kind of being slept on a little bit just because people are reading this first ability and being like, oh, this ability's great. Well, actually, this is a really good attacker as well, especially in the late game. But just being able to do 120 for 3 and resist at least 10, probably looking at 20, 30 damage, 50 from Psychic types. This thing is actually really, really tanky and will be taking 2 shots pretty well. We've put lots of supporters on the side. I'm not going to go through each one of them because we've talked about a few of them already, but I think Beast Box could be a really, really strong play. We've already said it. Metal Beast Box seems to gain a lot and seems to have the most diverse range of attackers in the format right now. So why not try and push it a little bit more by making all of your guys super tanky as well?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think There could be a Naganadel Stakataka kind of deal where you're using Acerolas and Max Potions. But I also think a sort of Beast Ring Elixir build with just Celesteela, because that has resistance to fighting already. So more Ultra Balls on top of that, it's going to be a real headache to deal with for the fighting decks. Even if you're not hitting them for weakness, you can slowly grind through them. And that Assembly-GX attack is a nice one-hit KO in the late game. So I think just Metal Elixirs with the non-GX Celesteela as well, just being an efficient one attachment, dead attack, just looks really good to me. So I think Stakataka has huge potential. There's the headache of the Sceptile, I guess, is the only real fear for Beast Box at the moment. But there shouldn't be too much fear about that overall. So I think Stakataka is definitely one that people will look towards for Worlds. I think kind of the biggest downside to the Ultra Beast decks that we've seen so far is that you have a lack of draw power, and that's just not going to change, which is, I guess, the only real hindrance for this deck. But now that you have this reduction of damage, potentially you just go so far ahead anyway that you can just announce attacks to win the game. That's pretty much what you got to hope to do, because really you need your bench to be full of Ultra Beasts to get full benefit here. Another thing that's really cool about Ultra Ball is that it's not only the active Pokemon, so you can be fully protected against spread archetypes if they're going to be a thing, which is hilarious. Good job, Stakataka. Next up, we have another GX Pokemon. This time it's going to be Altaria. It's a Dragon-type 200 hit point stage 1 with 3 attacks. The first of which, for a Fairy Colorless, does 50, and you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX during your opponent's next turn. So this is similar to Scoundrel Guard from Hooper, or from the GX attack of Zygarde-GX as well. Obviously you're doing a lot less damage, and that's a big downside here. There are some very good non-GX attackers in the former right now, and you poking 50 a turn is just really not good. You're going to be out-traded by non-GX Pokemon in a lot of situations, and that's going to be really, really awkward for you. If ever you try and break your lock using any of these other attacks, you can just get bopped by some of the bigger stuff that they can be packing. So Altaria's attack, although it is relatively easy to get going, I think you just a lot of the time get outdone by non-GXs. The other couple of attacks here for a Water Fairy Colorless, which is a really awkward cost, does 110 and isn't affected by any effects, which again, just not doing a lot really. Euphoria-GX for a Fairy Colorless. Your opponent's active is now asleep, and heal all damage from all of your Pokemon. We've actually seen Primarina with that Grand Echo-GX doing a similar thing, but without the sleep thing. That obviously Primarina never saw play, but that is a stage 2 in fairness. This heal, I mean, similar to Tapu Cure really, there are those niche spots where it can come in clutch for you, but I do stress that it will be niche, and if ever you turn off the Bright Tone, you can just get one shot by certain things. Even though you have 200 hit points, it's not out of the realms of possibility for people to use their GX attack and stuff like that to deal with Altarias. So potentially there's a way that you just play Quad Altaria, trying to grind people down, just like how we've seen Quad Hooper decks, but it's a real slow grind, and I think, I mean, your damage output is just so poor that you can get Ace of Roller Looped and such if they're just playing 1 or 2 reasonable non-GXs, even in like Zoroark decks. I just really don't see this card having much potential overall.
Yeah, I think we had to. We always have to talk about it because it's a GX attack, but a GX card. But I think Scoundrel Ring is pretty much infinitely better in most situations. It's not doing 50 damage, sure, and it's more energy to be able to attack with Hooper. But you can, this sort of preventing damage isn't conditional. So I really don't think Altaria is going to see play. Dragon does gain some support in this set, and another set that we're going to talk about in a few weeks' time, which is coming out at the beginning of September. So this is probably a better time for a Dragon type right now. But even so, like, Bright Tone just isn't doing enough. Even whilst it's locking EX and GX, it's still not doing enough for it to ever be a particularly strong card in my eyes. Next up, we have Salamence. This is kind of a pseudo reprint of an old Salamence, I believe. There's 2 Salamances in this set, and both are sort of pseudo reprints, which is cool. This one has 150 HP non-EX stage 2, and has the ability Dragon Wind. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may switch your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. So essentially, if this is active, you get a free Lysander. That's really, really strong. The attack is garbage, so the only reason you're going to be playing this is for the ability. Essentially, this is a card that we're going to put in what's called the Lance Waiting Room, which you'll hear about in the next couple of cards. The Lance Waiting Room is essentially waiting for the Dragonstorm set, which will be released, I believe, like I say, at the start of September. Just briefly, Lance Prism Star, you can only use if one of your Pokemon was knocked out on your opponent's last turn. You may search your deck for 2 Dragon Pokemon and put them onto your bench. Essentially, this turns this into a basic Pokemon, and that's one of the only ways we can see this seeing play. This may bump up to maybe a 2-star, depending on how good Lance deck is. But I think in general, even then, it's probably going to be quite niche because you can only get 2 Pokemon out with Lance. So a lot of the time, you're probably going to have to get your attackers out rather than just a tech Pokemon. But for now, this goes in the Lance Waiting Room, along with a couple of other cards we're going to talk about momentarily. I think this isn't going to see anywhere near play until then, at least.
Yeah, I mean, Gus is good, but we're so far away from just playing tech stage 2s that the Lance Waiting Room is the only way that we can see this ever having a glimmer of hope. Salamence-GX, even with the Lance Waiting Room, will never see play. It is a really, really terrible card. 250 hit points, I guess, is the only redeeming feature. It's a tank, I guess. It has the ability Dragon Lift. The retreat cost for each of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX and GX, is 0. So, I mean, fine, you might be able to throw up some of the lower evolution Pokemon into the active to give yourself pivoting, I guess. For Fire, Water, 2 colorless, Bright Flame does 200, and you discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. Not only is that a really awkward cost and very expensive, 200, I mean, it is a good amount of damage, but you still need Choice Band on top of everything else, and you're discarding, so you need to find a way to replenish that. So, not easy at all, and its GX attack for Fire, 2 colorless is just a 120 damage stipe to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Again, we've seen this with Tapu Fini, and that's a basic for the same cost. And that's just really grim to compare it to a basic Pokemon when it's a really expensive, chunky Stage 2. Man, this is a disappointing card. I mean, Salamence is a fan favourite of a lot of people, and he's really let everyone down here.
Yeah, this is really unfortunate. Next up, we have Latias Prism Star. This is a really, really strong card. This is a 4 out of 5 for us. Some people have actually rated it a 5 out of 5. This could be another couple of discrepancies we see. Maybe you want to chat about in the comments. Latias Prism Star is a 130 HP Dragon type. Obviously, the Prism Star rule, you can only run 1, and it goes into Lost Zone when it's dead. We have the Dreamy Mist attack for a colorless energy, so it doesn't have to be a specific type of energy, which is fantastic. Does 30 damage, and attach a basic energy from your discard pile to each of your benched basic Dragon Pokemon. As you can see, there's 4 Rayquazas right there. Imagine attaching to 4 Rayquazas turn 1. That sounds pretty good, right? Rayquaza's damage will go over momentarily, but essentially it does 30 more. It does 30 damage times the amount of energy on your board. So you're just going to be really kicking up huge amounts of damage. If you can get even just sort of 2 attachments, even just attachments on 2 Rays, is so fine because you're not only accelerating your attackers, you're also accelerating the damage as well. This is really, really strong. That plus Elixirs plus Ray's ability means that this deck actually looks to be one of the most turbo decks we've seen in a long time. Very comparable to Snuggly Generator Pachirisu. Obviously one of the big downsides of the electric sort of Snuggly Generator deck was it was all weak to fighting, just as fighting was becoming good. So that was never going to be ideal. This definitely is much nicer. Pachirisu had 70 HP. This has 130. Doesn't have a bad weakness and actually attaches to more Pokemon more reliably. So that's really, really good. I don't think there's much else to say. This card will be fantastic whilst Ray is in format and potentially whilst other basic dragons are in format. Like I say, dragons are definitely receiving a boost this set. And this, I think, is inherently one of the best cards we've seen for dragon types pretty much since Double Dragon Energy came out.
Yeah, I mean, this is just pure Scream synergy with Rayquaza. I think, although it can do lots of basic dragon Pokemon, it's pretty much just for Ray, because you need to somehow find a way to put basic energy in a discard pile. Ray's pretty much the only guy that can do that for you, but it's an insta-play in Ray. He's going to be your accelerator that gets you rolling, and then you're going to be swinging for big damage with him. So Latias, Prism Star, very, very good card. Community agrees. And we'll get on to why we only did it a 4-star in a moment. First of all, let's look at his broski. It's going to be the Latios Prism Star. It has 140 hit points. Don't know why it has a slight difference from the other one. And it has Dragon Fleet for 2 colorless energy. Does 50 times each of your evolution dragon Pokemon in play. So this as well lives in the Lance Prism Star waiting room, because I think right now there's not really any reason for you to be playing lots of Dragon Evolution Pokemon. I think Garchomp's the only real one we have in format. But you can try and stack a few up. But even if you have a board like with a Garchomp and a couple of Gabites, Dragon Fleet, yes, it's doing a good amount, but 180 is not even the number you need to hit anymore. It's 190 a lot of the time. So really, really awkward. I think Lance gives this guy a hope in hell of doing anything. But even then, I think you need to be in such a beneficial state to get any value from this card that it may not even see play, even with these sort of like Lance-based decks. So I think Latios definitely got the worst end of the stick out of the two, having to focus on evolving Pokemon, but it can do decent damage if you have an ideal setup. That's the only real thing we can say about this card.
Yeah, definitely. I think this card's success will completely be dictated on how this evolution-based dragon deck, if at all, is built. If there's a deck that can get multiple dragon evolutions out, even without Lance, and Lance is just that one turn in the early game or maybe even the late game just to have that little extra boost. If you can build a dragon deck that doesn't completely rely on Lance but has that boost from Lance, I can see this also being thrown in just to get a knockout in the mid to late game out of nowhere, which is really, really good. But I think, like you say, it definitely got the worst end of the stick. On to Rayquaza-GX. This is going to be, I think, the biggest upset we have, actually. Maybe Steven is slightly bigger, but so many people have rated this a 5-star card. We're actually saying no. We think it's only 4-star. Rayquaza-GX as a card is, I think, fantastic in general, though. 180 HP Dragon type. Weakness is pretty irrelevant right now. Not Psychic. Fairy is not being seen very much at all. The ability Storm and Stress. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard the top 3 cards of your deck, then attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to this Pokemon. The fact this is a May ability is really, really strong because it means you don't have to do this. If you're not needing to, you're just needing to get another attacker down. If you're going to be getting a big turn from Latios, maybe you don't need to be discarding these top 3 just for this extra 1 energy attachment. It's nice that you're not forced to mill up 3 of your own cards, which is really, really good. But at the same time, being able to, the way this is worded means you can mill 3, and even if the energy is within those 3, you can still attach it, which is really, really nice. So this ability is worded really, really well, and I think it gives a lot of versatility to the card. Dragon Break does 30 damage for grass, lightning, colorless, times the number of grass and lightning energy attached to your Pokemon. So assuming the third energy attached to this Pokemon is indeed one of these basic energy, that's 90 for 3. That's pretty awkward. That's not great. Say you have another Rayquaza-GX set up on the bench. That's 180 for 3. That's getting pretty good. That's 190 with a Fury Belt. That's 210 with a Choice Band. But that's not even sort of where that stops. I think you're going to have perhaps maybe this Rayquaza in the active, maybe 1 or 2 energy on 2 Rayquazas on the bench. Maybe you haven't used Latios Prism Star yet. Maybe you've been able to retreat out. Maybe there's lots of ways you can actually just attach energy, not through elixirs and Latias and the ability, just naturally through the game you'll be attaching energy. I think as soon as you hit that 210 mark with Dragon Break, it's going to be very difficult to break that 210 because you're going to have a board set up that you can just constantly attach energy to each turn and keep rebuilding the damage, which is really, really strong. It's going to be a big, powerful, super turbo one-shot deck that looks to mill through the deck really, really quickly, attach lots of energy, and essentially just take out 3 GX Pokemon turn after turn after turn, no matter what your opponent's playing. That's the really, really big upside of Rayquaza. The downside is Dragon Break doesn't trade awfully favorably against non-EXs. That's one of Rayquaza's, from what we can see from our thought mind bubble with our testing group, from what we can see, it doesn't look like Rayquaza is going to be able to deal too well with some of these non-EX decks. But that being said, the format is very, very EX heavy right now. Malamar likes to play a lot of EXs. The more successful, there's only been 1 or 2 successful non-EX lists. Buzzwole is moving away from EXs, but Lycanroc is still a huge integral part of that deck, and most lists are still playing at least 1 Buzzwole-GX as well. And Zoroark is Zoroark, which will always want as many Zoroarks on the board as possible. So all of these decks will be running lots of Pokemon for us to feast on as Rayquaza, and try and always just take 6 prizes pretty much in 3 turns, which is really, really good. Finally, the GX attack, Tempest-GX. For a single grass, discards your hand, then draws 10 cards. Obviously, that's quite similar to Drampa-GX's GX attack. This discards instead of shuffles in and draws 10. Can be better, can be worse. It's the old should I end, should I Sycamore, turn 1 kind of debate. There will be situations where one's better than the other. But just having a really, really good attack, especially in the early turns to get you out of sort of dead draw, it's nice. In the late turns, being end to 1, you can just then Tempest, build your hand back up and force them to end you again, which is really, really nice. It's just a nice sort of GX attack to have. We don't need a big blow-up GX attack because the regular attack does that. So why not just have a little bit of added consistency in that as well? The biggest reason why we're rating this 4-star is actually it doesn't seem quite as impressive as we first thought. Initially, both Liss and Latios were 5-star. We were like, they're obvious 5 stars. The synergy is fantastic. This is going to be a fantastic Worlds deck. And we still think this is going to see a huge amount of play at Worlds. This could be a very, very popular archetype. It looks to be possibly one of the most popular archetypes from this set. There's only 2 or 3 that I think are really going to make a splash, and this I think will be the most popular and probably the most successful, but I still don't think it's quite got the consistency right now. There's too many awkward things against these fringe non-EX matchups, especially things like Heavy Baby Buzzwole, Lycanroc, could still be awkward. I think in general, it's not going to quite be as impressive as everyone first thinks. I think a lot of people actually may have started to realize that already, which is fair enough. Maybe people have started to put more testing in. We still have a little sort of standard tournament to deal with, so we haven't been able to put hours and hours into this yet. But eventually, I think everyone will start to realize that Ray might not be the sort of busted combo deck that we first thought. It does look like when it runs hot, it runs really hot and can be pretty devastating. There's not much you can do to deal with it, but there will be certain games where it doesn't quite run how you're meant to, and I think it's actually going to really, really struggle in the decks it doesn't quite set up, especially against, like I say, these non-EX matchups where you're not necessarily going to be trading favorably.
I mean, that's really interesting. I never thought a downside of Ray was going to be its consistency. I think that's the big driving force of why you should play Ray. I mean, it is super quick. It has, potentially 8 ball search cards, Acro Bikes, Elixirs, its own ability. I think the real selling point for Ray is that it'll get itself down to, a 10-card deck very reasonably, pretty quickly as well. And then you just need to power pad in some Guzmas and you should be good with a Rangaroo as your only support for draw. I think Ray has definitely got the consistency side down. I think that's the big reason why we will see lots of people play Ray. Just like with Mega Ray, basically, where you just cycle a bunch, try and one-hit KO. And just like with Mega Ray, I'll go back to that analogy, you're trying to make this big one-hit KO machine deck. Mega Ray always struggled with these sort of awkward, pernickety single-prize Pokemon. If we're motoring this hard with our deck, we're going to struggle against Garbatoxin and Trashalanche. We're always going to struggle against Weavile because you're playing a bunch of ability Pokemon onto your board and you need these Rayquazas to be on there for your attachments and for your damage output. There's going to be Frogs, that can be annoying. You can tech grass Pokemon, like maybe one Bulu for you. That could be really beneficial, but without teching, I think Greninja's not going to be easy for you. So it's the non-GXs that make me concerned. If there's going to be non-GX heavy Buzzwole variants, if there's going to be even Malamar, sometimes there are non-GX heavy variants. I saw a Lugia build of Malamar make top 64 in NAIC. So people are just playing non-GXs for the sake of playing non-GXs, and those are hurdles for Ray. Those are real obvious and annoying hurdles. So I can see all of these things being headaches for Ray. It's one of those things where if you underestimate Ray going into Worlds, it could do really well. But if people are like, man, I think people are going to play Ray, let me have an answer, it's really easy to answer this card. So again, I'll talk about Mega Ray in that that's going to be the life cycle of this card as well. There'll be tournaments where it can just storm through and win because it will be very fast, very consistent, get its job done almost every game. But then there'll be tournaments where it's on the radar, it's easily tackled, it's not going to do so well. So it really is down to the field of day 1 and 2, whether Ray or not will succeed. And that's why we can't give it a 5-star, because I don't think it will ever truly be top tier because it's too easy to counter. But it'll be a constant, like, tier 2 threat that could just, if it's forgotten about for long enough, just completely overtake a tournament and take down a win. Next up, onto the colourless types, we have Delcatty. This has a really cool ability, Friend Search. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you may put 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your hand. So this is like using 2 Versus Seekers in one, or using a Lusamine, for example, for only the supporter effect. We obviously don't have Versus Seeker in the format. Palpad and Lusamine are our only options to recover. And these are pretty weak right now. But that's not to say that Delcatty isn't also quite weak. Having to dedicate a bench space and deck space as well to a 1-1 or a 2-2 line of Delcatty is going to be awkward for you. I've thought about playing Palpads in Ray, but I've also thought about playing a Delcatty line because you have so much discard in Ray that you need to play a reasonable amount of Super Rods and Rescue Stretchers already, that you could try just having a 1-1 line of Delcatty, and even though you could discard some of these pieces, you could use Stretchers to get back Delcatty, and that can basically be getting you game by hitting Guzmas or hitting an N or something like that for you. So I think there's a tiny avenue of hope that Delcatty could be stronger than Palpad in Ray, which is a real niche statement, basically. But other than that, I don't see Delcatty seeing much play. The ability is cool, though, and I think this is one of our most harsh 1-stars. Jack made me do it. But yeah, I like the ability. It's just that not many decks can justify making the 1-1 spaces in the deck or on the board for it to pay off, really.
Joe's been blinded by Cube. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Next up, we have Dunsparce. Now, this is a cool card. This is pretty much an exact reprint from another EX set. I think it's Sandstorm. Mm-hmm. There's a very slight difference. I believe you have to switch now with Strike and Run. I think there's been a slight errata on that since we first saw the translation. So I believe there is an ever so slight change. So you can't actually run your old ones, which is really unfortunate. But we've said it's a 3 out of 5 star. It's a 50 HP colorless type with Strike and Run as its first attack. Search your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon, put them onto your bench, shuffle your deck afterwards. And I believe, quote me on I believe, you must then switch Dunsparce with one of your benched. This is a nice post-rotation option as we're losing Bridget. We have Fan Club, we have Alolan Vulpix, so that we already have options. But being able to get these Pokemon on the bench on turn 1, net them on the bench, is really, really strong to guarantee evolutions on the second. On the second and third turns is essentially why you would run this over Vulpix. Vulpix grabs the evolutions you want, but being able to Strike and Run and just guarantee that you can evolve and that you have Pokemon to evolve next turn is really, really important. I think in general this is going to be very sparingly used before rotation. We have Bridget, we have Lele Bridget, we have Treasure Lele Bridget. As you can see, we have many ways to get to Bridget and Bridget itself. So I think in almost all scenarios, Bridget will be better because a lot of the times you're going to have to be running multiple copies of Dunsparce that you're going to have to find turn 1 or start with as well. So in general, I think before we lose Bridget, it's pretty much worse. But when we lose Bridget, this could be the new sort of answer to setting up the board in the early turns. This was really, really popular back in the day. I think it was a staple in a lot of decks from what I've read and heard and spoken to about. So I think there's a lot of hype for this card. I don't think this is quite going to be as good as people first initially hyped. Some people lost their minds when they saw this card. I don't think it's actually going to be crazy good, but it's definitely a really, really good card to up consistency post-rotation. It also has Sudden Flash, which does 10 and on a coin flip paralyzes, which we've seen paralysis win games before, even with Guzma, Acerola, that kind of thing in format. This is slightly worse than just Bubble because you do damage, so Acerola does become live. But in general, this kind of attack at least is better than just a flat colorless for 10.
Yeah, it's awesome to see this Dunsparce come back, and I think Bridget is, going nowhere. Don't be surprised to see that forever until it is rotated out. I'm not sure if this is better than just playing like Nest Balls and Lily, but it could be. And that's why we're having to rate it a 3-star, really. Because this did see play for like 2 years, just as a 4 of, not just a 1 of, it was a 4 of in decks for like 2 whole years.
Yeah.
So the value is here. Getting 3 basics out is really good. I think if you have to switch, it's actually a lot worse. I didn't actually know that distinction.
I need to double check that, and if that's not the case, I will somehow find a way to correct the video. But I'm 90% sure it's since been errata that you have to switch.
That would be a shame. But I mean, there are still benefits to that, because I remember when people played the Dunsparce, they'd sometimes play. There was like an ability Jirachi that when it was in the active, you could look at the top 5 cards and take one from it. So in a similar vein, you could throw things like the Shining Legends Hooper into the active, Wobbs being rotated, but you can throw in some other annoying active Pokemon for them to force your opponent to gust around, and that could also be really nice for you. You can even strike a run into an Alolan Vulpix for your following turn if you're trying to build up your board that way into stage 2. So it's a really nice early game setup attack. It's just whether it will be outclassed by just Nest Ball, because let's not underrate how good that card also is in the format. So awesome to see him come back though, and he could see play based on when Bridget leaves, because Fan Club is pretty poor in comparison. Finally, for Pokemon, I think we have Kecleon. Oh no, not quite finally. We do have Kecleon. It's a 1-star colorless Pokemon. Everyone agrees. It's again one of the worst rated. It does have a cool ability, Unit Color 2. If this Pokemon has any unit energy of the Lightning, Psychic, Metal variety attached to it, this Pokemon becomes Lightning, Psychic, Metal. So you're trying to hit for additional weaknesses. Slash does for 3 colorless 80, so Choice Man gets you to 110. So if you are hitting for weakness, you're getting a 1-hit KO in most situations. I think the Lightning and Metal typing is really irrelevant right now in the format. You're not really hitting much for weakness. Maybe Lightning on like Ho-Oh, but that's about it. Can't even think of anything weak to Metal that's relevant. Psychic's probably the only one where it matters. And you can be one-shotting Buzzwolves and Necrozmas, but you have to think, if you're playing these unit energies, you're probably already playing Psychic stuff anyway. Like, I can't think of any pure Metal deck that plays like unit and DCE, or any pure, like if you're playing a pure single type of a deck, you don't need units anyway. So you're playing units because you're already using this for typing reasons. So it feels really niche to be playing this Kecleon because you'll already have stuff that can one-shot them. And it's special energy, which gets punished. And you also need to commit DCE to the deck. So you need to be playing 8 special energy already, and then something else to make Kecleon work. It's just super niche, and probably won't ever see play.
Yeah. I literally, as you were saying, is there anything that's relevant Metal Week right now? I'm sitting here looking at 3 Mega Guardies, but maybe they're not quite relevant enough. We do have one more Pokemon to talk about, though, and that is Slacking. This is another 1-star card, unfortunately. Slacking is another reprint from early Ruby and Sapphire, I believe. 160 HP Stage 2. Fighting Week again. It's a colorless type, so always going to have that Fighting Week caveat, which is pretty sad. It does have the Lazy ability as long as this Pokemon is your active. Your opponent's Pokemon have no abilities other than Lazy. So this is another of these Ability Lock cards. I have to talk about it because Ability Lock is fantastic in this format. Unfortunately, I think this is not only worse than Garb, but also worse than Glaceon. Glaceon is seeing no play at all. Garb is Garb, so is, of course, seeing play. But Garb rotates, so then we're down to Glaceon and this, and I think you always pick Glaceon over this, because you have turn 1 attach Energy Evolution to get this out, to get Glaceon out turn 1. Yes, it's not quite as encumbersome as Lazy, but it's still showing off things like Lele, which are really, really big in the early turns. So I think in general it's going to be really, really difficult to play this card, but being able to have... This feels like a strafe target. If we ever get a big strafing deck, if we can find space for a slacking line, I think this is going to be one of the only ways we can see slacking work, personally. Also has an attack, triple colorless, critical move does 160. You have to discard an energy from slacking, and it can't attack during your next turn. 3 for 160 is really good. Pushes up to 190 with a choice band. That's one-shotting a Buzzwole. But unfortunately, almost everything in that deck is one-shotting you back just by poking you. So, it's a good number, but it's stage 2 that requires 3 energy. That pretty much dies to one of the best decks in the format right now. So, unfortunately, even though it's Ability Lock, and Ability Lock pretty much rules whenever it's in format, this Ability Lock isn't quite good enough.
Yeah, and that wraps it up for the set. I have nothing more to say on slacking. Here is our overall rating summary. Only 1 5-star, little Magcargo powering through. I think there's a lot of potential behind Ray and Stakataka, though. Let's not forget that 4-star is a very high rating, and we think they will certainly see play if they're 4-star. So don't be discouraged if you think these are even better than we do. Lots of 1-stars in this set, though. Lots of reprints that we have to talk about. We talk about every trainer, and there was a lot of those 1-stars really bumping up those stats. There are also some very disappointing Stage 2 GX Pokemon in this set as well. But there's a smattering of important things. I think for Worlds, be on the lookout for Ray, be on the lookout for Beast Box. I think also Magcargo sneaking into Zoro is going to be pretty commonplace. I think almost everyone's going to be doing that. So there will definitely be some changes in interaction to Worlds. I think Buzzwole has to be on its toes because there's potentially more Naganadel. There's also potentially Sceptile roaming around, and there's even Banette as well. So that has a little bit more uncertainty going towards it. I think there's not much uncertainty for Zoroark other than Rayquaza coming out as a big one-hit KO machine. And even though you play things like Parallel, is that going to be enough? Because they can just concentrate on the Rays that they have. I'm not really certain. So the biggest decks are sort of coming under threat a little bit, even though Zoro gained the best card of this set as well. So I can't really tell what's going to come out on top of Worlds. If I did know that, I'd be keeping it to myself. But yeah, I think there'll be enough to spice things up at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. As for us, we have one more tournament in this format before we can start going all on Celestial Storm. We have Valencia in 6 days' time. So there will be a slight change to the streaming schedule over the next few weeks just because we're not here. But there will still be a stream looking at various NAIC results based on when you're watching this. Like I say, we have Valencia, and then we're all aboard the Celestial Storm hype train. So there's going to be deck reviews, deck analysis videos. Until we get the cards on PTGO, we have some fun stuff lined up for stream. A few weeks of games, fun, that kind of thing you'll be seeing. And then as soon as we can get these cards on Celestial Storm, I think expect a few more streams from us than usual as well, just because we're going to be testing, ready for Worlds. Joe's going, I'm not, so I will also begin to start testing post-rotation, which of course is a very, very important thing coming up in the next couple of months, which we will give you our full analysis of very, very shortly. But other than that, I think we've pretty much covered almost everything. My voice is dead, so if there's anything else from you, Joe?
We are all good. Cheers
Excellent.
for watching, guys, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.